ほら、ルフィ、今一緒に海賊になる仲間を探してるんだ。
Hello guys, welcome to my channel The Wandering Zoro, your go-to destination for anime-related content. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. In today's video, we're going to be diving into Part 7 of the series What If Quirkless Deku gets the ability to copy all the quirks. So be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. Izuku watched Class 1 leave for their next class. But Izuku found his eyes traveling to one of them in particular, Katsuki. Izuku still couldn't believe that he was still the same Katsuki as the one he knew a bit more than a year ago. Izuku wouldn't say he was completely different because the same Katsuki snide and anger still comes out in him. But Izuku will say that Katsuki has made a sizable change. He no longer screeches or rudely talks to people whenever he feels like it. He would do it with his ex-friends as well. No matter who Katsuki was with, he was always a butthole to them, because he thought of himself as a god, better than everyone else, the strongest and entitled to whatever he wanted. But now, Katsuki has the sense to give people respect, being able to talk to another person like they are a person from what Izuku feels forever. He still uses nicknames when referring to literally anyone, but the ones he uses now are tame and proper nicknames than insults. Like he calls Dinky Pikachu, Ashido Pinky, and Ijiro Hammerhead. Izuku can see several nicknames that he knows Katsuki would have given them permanently. Izuku does wish he had thought about it more when he forgave Katsuki. Both Dabi and Himiko have voiced their anger on his decision, as well as Katsuki himself. Looking back on it, Izuku does wish he would have thought about forgiving Katsuki, but he just looked so feeble, so out of character and desperate. For someone who only ever wanted approval from the people he looked up to and finally getting an apology from Katsuki Bakugo of all people, Izuku just felt happy. But looking at Katsuki's progress now, already having a new friend group with nice people and having the respect of his peers, not from his quirk, but because he was determined and kind. Not nice, but he can't fully change himself. Being able to respect others will get respect in return. So Izuku does forgive Katsuki. Izuku was filled with a sense of dread as he and Himiko walked to their next class. Last lesson with Class 1B didn't exactly go well. At least 6 students were visibly unhappy with him being his teacher, and the rest of them seemed more neutral than positive. A lot less lively than Class 1A. But whether he wanted to or not, Izuku still had a job to do. He opened the door with a smile, and Himiko right behind him. The class immediately ceased their chatter once they entered. Izuku saw the family glares but carried on like he didn't see them. However, when they did stop, he had a feeling that it may have been the person next to him responsible for that. Izuku smiled at the class. Afternoon class. Today you will meet me and Carmilla down at Training Ground Beta for quirk training, Izuku said to the class. Ugh, thank God, Toguru said in annoyed relief. Izuku looked at him and sent him a glare. Toguru glared back while some of their classmates shivered at Izuku's pissed look. But then Izuku smiled again like nothing had happened. He turned around with Carmilla and started walking out of the room. You have 5 minutes, Himiko called, bending back to be in the room for longer before popping out. Izuku smiled at her antics and shut the door behind him. They walked to the training grounds and waited for the class to arrive. The class came in 2 batches. The first one were the more jovial of the class, probably the ones who accepted Izuku for him being their teachers than the others. There was 11 of them. Itsuka, Shirhai, Yosetsu, Nairenjiki, Jiroda, Pony, Tetsu, Juzo, Setsuna, Kojiro, and Reiko. They were all happily talking with each other, some more than others. The next group walked out next. Most were silent, but some of them were talking. Sun, Toguru, Ibara, Kinoko, Yui, Manga, Kozai, Nito, and Hiryu. A few of them were glaring at Izuku, which Himiko returned. A few of them noticed the scattered materials. A robot, a mannequin, and bag of sand. The students were both confused and intrigued about why the objects were placed the way they were. Hello, class, to the observant few of you. You already may have seen the objects behind me scattered around. These are your training materials, and please, try not to destroy them. Today you will train your quirks with the provided materials, doing whatever you can to practice with your quirks, and I will come around and offer some tips. Now any questions? Izuku asks. Immediately, he heard Tagaru growl and step forward with an angered look. Izuku's face dropped into annoyance as he tried desperately to groan. No comment. What the? We're supposed to be battling each other, learn hero tricks and tactics. Wear our frickin' hero costume, not dawdle around with our quirks. Tagaru yelled furiously. Izuku sighed as he glared at the praying mantis-looking boy. You are not dawdling. The difference in your skill in using your quirks compared to heroes are drastic, and you'll inevitably get far better control and understanding of your quirk. I can't have untrained teenagers using deadly unbuilt weapons to harm each other. Once I see you able to use your quirk with enough control, I'll allow you to do some more exciting heroic action, Izuku answered calmly. This answer did not seem to satisfy Tagaru as he still angrily marched forward and pointed at Izuku. See, this is why actual heroes should teach this. Not juvenile delinquents who probably threatened to get their place here. The boy sneered. Himiko took a step forward, but Izuku gripped the back of her shirt to make sure she wouldn't do anything drastic. Those are big words for someone acting like a child, Izuku deadpanned. Tagaru's scowl deepened. The principal of this school is the smartest being in the world, so whatever he says is probably correct. He offered me this job and trusted me with it because he knew I could do it well. But since little old you thinks you know better, I will make a one-time exception. You may spar with someone else, but if any of you cause an injury that will make me send you to the infirmary, you will be immediately expelled. Understood? Izuku said. Tagaru's eyes as well as the class widened at Izuku's statement. Izuku smirks at them, and then he outstretches his arms to the class. Any takers? Izuku said. Tagaru growled when nobody went up. Oh, come on, he growled. With a sigh, Hiryu Rin stood forward with a hand raised. Izuku nodded his head at the boy, but didn't miss the tiny glare of his narrowed eyes at him. All right, Kamakiri and Rin, go to the end of the training ground and spar away from everyone. Now the rest of you, find a place to train with the materials, Izuku stated. The two boys quickly walked past them, sending glares toward Izuku and Himiko. But both backed off when Himiko turned and hissed at them. The rest of the class didn't move immediately, but as soon as Itsuka did, everyone followed suit. She was like the non-elected leader of the class as Izuku noticed that many of her classmates already follow her and listen to her. So that is why Izuku went to her first. She was quite close, so he didn't have to go far. He saw that she was picking up the robot with her quirk while karate chopping the ground and creating a small crater from her enlarged hand. She looked up and saw Himiko and Izuku walking over to her. She smiled and stood up properly. Hello, Sensei Hope and Carmilla. Can I help you? She asks. Izuku smiles at her politeness and shakes his head. No, actually more to help you. Just see how to use your quirk and all, Izuku responded. Itsuka smiled at the two. She put down the robot and raised her enlarged hands and started waving them around. While my quirk isn't flashy but does pack quite the punch, Itsuka giggles. I can break large solid objects quite easily and even make gusts of wind. They aren't powerful but could push smoke away if needed, she said. Izuku nodded, already knowing all of that information, but there were still a couple of tricks he wanted to see if she could use. The punches you could deliver can be increased in power by simply waiting to deliver them. Throwing the punch and enlarging your hand just before you hit a target would be a lot stronger if you otherwise hadn't. Because the air resistance your hand would have while moving would slow it down significantly if you first throw the punch without the use of your quirk, Izuku states. Itsuka smiles widely at him. Wow, that's a good idea. Thanks, Sensei, she said. No problem. It is my job, Izuku responded. But I now have a question on your quirk, Izuku said. Itsuka nodded and smiled politely. I'm all ears, she said. Well, okay. I noticed that your fingernails grow with your hand. But if you were to cut your fingernails off, would they immediately shrink or stay the same size? Would they shrink or stay the same size? Izuku asked, slowly started rambling. Luckily, Himiko nudged him, and Izuku snapped out of them. He looked at Itsuka, who was taken aback by his question, but still curious. Well, although disgusting, certainly interesting. Do any of you have a way for me to cut my nails? Itsuka asked. Izuku looked over to Himiko, who had already made a pair of nail clippers in her hand with a small little bit of blood around it. Itsuka's eyes widened before Himiko quickly answered. It's my quirk, create thingies with my blood, Himiko answered with a toothy grin. Itsuka calmed down and took the nail clippers. She clipped her nails and then increased the size of her hand. Nothing happened until Itsuka focused on the nail on the ground. It shut up in size, and Itsuka gagged at the sight, as it was a fingernail. At that, the nail shrunk. Well, that could lead to something interesting in the future. But for now, focus on different ways you could utilize the first thing I said, Izuku stated. Itsuka recollected herself and smiled, nodding her head. Of course, Sensei will do. Izuku sent Himiko out to check on the two boys sparring. Despite his words, Izuku doesn't have the power to expel like Aizawa does. Like all of the other teachers, Izuku has to go through a tedious process to actually expel a student, as well as approval from Nizu himself, which most of the time is too much effort. However, Aizawa has a special ability. He can expel anyone he pleases without objection or even questioning from Nizu. When it is done, it is done. It seems to be a mutual trust and Nizu's pure faith in Aizawa's methods and results that allows Nizu to allow him to do as he pleases with his class. Although most students he expels, most get re-enrolled. But some, like his last year class, were all permanently expelled on the first day, with Aizawa's only statement as to why being. It would have been a waste of time. None had the drive or reason to be a hero. I didn't even get to start the quirk assessment I do before expelling them. So Izuku really couldn't follow up on his threat of expelling one of them if they injured the other. So Himiko is there to stop them from doing so. Now Izuku walks alone to the next closest student, Shirhai. Well, Shirhai was there before he disappeared into the shadows. Of the three items, he out into a certain position. Kurwaro, can you come out? I need to talk to you, Izuku asks. He then watches the black-skinned, white-haired boy emerge from the shadows and slowly pushing himself out and up. He got to his feet and stood eye-to-eye to Izuku. Yes, sensei? He asked. How are you training your quirk? Izuku asked. Shirhai shrugs and looked back at the shadow pool he made. I am trying to improve my ability to traverse in the abyss. I know that I can, but my ability at it is poor. Unfortunately, that is about as much I can achieve with my quirk. It is pretty straightforward with some qualms along with it, Shirhai speaks. Izuku was slightly shocked by him. He had a similar way of speech as Fumikage, two students with quirks affiliated with darkness. Izuku hadn't heard Shirhai speak in a sentence form, only obtaining his name from their first lesson. But he's sure he'd get used to his speech eventually. Do you mind telling me what these qualms of your quirk are? Izuku asked. Shirhai nodded. For some reason, if another dark object comes in contact while I am merged into darkness, immediately I am forced to merge with that. For example, if I laid in the pool of shadows there, and you were to step into it with your dark shoe, I will be pulled to inhabit your shoe, Shirhai states. Izuku's eyes widened as he looked down at his shoe. Wait, can you also inhabit black objects? Izuku asked, unaware of this information. Shirhai nods. Correct. Objects that are dark enough in hue and color work with my quirk, Shirhai iterates. Izuku nods at his information. Izuku had read that in Shirhai's quirk file, but dismissed it as just lazy wording. Izuku had done this because he assumed Shirhai's quirk would work the same as Akido's, but they are obviously different quirks, so Izuku should have expected this. So you can merge with items smaller than yourself? Izuku asked. Shirhai nodded. Indeed, but it hurts. Even small nudges or taps can force me out of the darkness, Shirhai states. Izuku nods at the new information, but unfortunately still can't decipher new ways to use his quirk. Shirhai is probably a perfect counter against shadow quirks like Fumikage and can have great spy and mobility capabilities. But offensive-wise or anything else, Izuku almost has nothing. Well, the only things I can suggest is get better in traversing in the darkness. Learn how to hop from one dark place to another without touching the ground. Hopefully later, you can merge onto a person and act as extra set of limbs and be used as surprise attack, Izuku said. Shirhai shrugged and nodded his head. Yeah, I guess. I've accepted that I'll mostly be for support or against specific villains, Shirhai said, and Izuku immediately shook his head. Well, you will be needed for those two situations. You can work exceptionally well as a nighttime or underground hero, being able to sneak up on thugs without ever being noticed and take them down, as well being almost impervious to damage, but you will have hopefully gained the ability to avoid by then, Izuku had told Shirhai with a smile. Surprisingly, Izuku got a smile in return. The next student was the first one part of the group that was not fond of Izuku. Sun, a dark-haired and brown-eyed boy with a quirk called Gyrate. It allows him to gyrate his entire body with a strong enough ability to generate winds around him. Sen was currently breaking the ground by pointing both of his hands at the ground, acting like a jackhammer. Izuku approached him, which Sun had not noticed. "Kaibara, how are you going?" Izuku asked. This got the boy's attention. Sen sighed and stood up. He put his hands down into his pockets. He turned around to Izuku with an expressionless face. The boy shrugs. "Good, I guess. Just seeing how well I can use my quirk for other things," Sun says. Izuku nods his head, ignoring the fact that Sun is really trying to ignore that Izuku is there. Izuku decides to just make this encounter quick. "How well does your quirk cause damage to others?" Izuku asks. Again, Sun shrugs. "I can break a bone, cause deep cuts on a person. Nothing much though," Sun says. Izuku nods and looks over to the level 1 robot and points at it. "Can I see you jab the robot with your quirk?" Izuku asks. "Sure," Sun says with little care. He turns around and walks to the robot with his hands still in his pockets. He then raises his hand and it starts vibrating. He reels his arm back, his arm flat with his hand pointing at the robot. He then jabs his hand forward and strikes the robot. The level 1 robot is pushed back slightly at the force. A large dent where Sun had struck the robot is seen. Izuku nods, but still isn't done. "Great. Can I see what happens if you hit the robot with your palm?" Izuku asks. Sun raises his brow, but nods as well. He turns back to the robot and gyrates his hand again. But this time, he slams his palms into the robot. There was little damage to where Sun had hit the robot. A bit of paint scratched, but that's about it. But the notable part about it was the robot jumped back and toppled over. Izuku smiled. "Just as I thought. The pointed parts of your body, like your fingers, toes, and elbows, can cause significant damage. But a flat part of your body like arm or palm would knock the opponent back. Those parts would be used for defense," Izuku states. Izuku could see that Sun was stunned and impressed by what Izuku had just observed about his quirk, but tried to hide it with no success. "Okay," was his response. "Okay, so some martial arts would be good for you to know. I'll keep that in mind." "All right, now, suggestions on what you can practice," Izuku states, which catches Sen's attention. "Your quirk can be used for mobility. You can gyrate your legs and potentially use that as a form of slide-like movement to traverse across ground. Maybe up vertical walls, but I'm not sure about that. The next attack is some sort of dash. By with wind you generate around yourself. If you jump in the air and gyrate your entire body, you can probably send yourself a few feet forward at very quick speeds," Izuku says. Sen was visibly shocked, but tried to hide it once again. Izuku sighs and shook his head. "Thanks, Sensei-you." He pauses before he talks again. "You are right for this job," he says. Izuku was surprised to hear that, but smiled at Sun. "Thank you, Kaibara," Izuku thanked. Izuku moved to his next student, who was Reiko Yanagi. She was a shy girl, having her hair flopped over one of her eyes. She had a ghost-like appearance, dull gray hair, a slim body, and pale skin. Reiko was currently manipulating the objects, puppeteering them in the air with rapid hand movements. Izuku walked over to her. She gasped when she saw him, but quickly collected herself and carefully set the materials she was given down. She then turns to Izuku, her fingers shaking slightly as she brushed her hair. Izuku didn't think it was her being afraid of Izuku. Actually, looking at some of the footage before the entrance exam, she seemed to act this way with other people as well, being incredibly shy and inept at talking with others. "Hello, Yanagi. How have you been going with your quirk?" Izuku asked. Yanagi sheepishly nodded her head and looked off to the side and up as she was taller than Izuku. "Awayaji, good," she stuttered. Izuku smiled at the shy girl, knowing the feeling of being socially incapable. "That's great. I'm here to help and see what you can do with your quirk. So could you use it on me?" Izuku asked. Yanagi took a deep breath and exhaled. She nodded her head and turned to Izuku, barely able to keep eye contact with him. Yanagi whipped her hands up and started rapidly moving them. Izuku moved upwards as he relaxed into the strange feeling. Izuku had always thought her quirk was weird. Reiko has a telekinesis quirk and seems to be able to move multiple objects easily, which is unlike his sister. Reiko also moves her hand, which Izuku hasn't seen other telekinetic quirks do as well. Even the name, Poltergeist, he found strange. Why is her telekinesis quirk called Poltergeist and not just telekinesis? Izuku didn't understand until he felt the effect of being moved by her quirk. It felt like hands were grabbing him from all over, like he was being passed from hand to hand. There felt like hundreds of hands were forcing his movement in a direction that Izuku had no control over. Izuku now understands why her quirk is called poltergeist instead of telekinesis. Her quirk isn't telekinesis, but she can form near invisible and mostly intangible hands to do as she wishes by moving her hands. Soon Izuku was moved to the ground, and Izuku now understood. He had been thinking about Reiko's quirk all wrong. His notes on her quirk were all wrong, as they were quite similar to the ones he has from Izumi's. Her quirk acts a lot differently, so he has to think of new things. Wow, I thought your quirk was just telekinesis, Izuku said, feeling his body to get rid of the phantom touches of Reiko's quirk. The girl shyly nodded her head. Yeah, it is best described as telekinesis, she muttered. Izuku shook his head. No, it's so much more complicated than what I thought. You could potentially keep people in place or punch people safely if you fully master your ability, Izuku states. Reiko was shaking at the enthusiasm that Izuku was displaying, so Izuku toned himself down a bit. For now, get better at your basic abilities of moving things around before you try harder parts of your quirk, Izuku says. Reiko sheepishly nods. Yes, sensei. The next student's Izuku kind of brazed by. One thought appeared in his head though as Izuku went by these four students. Nairenjiki Shota, Kojiro Bondo, Kinoko Komori, and Yui Kodai. They all had quirks Izuku could easily explain and give suggestions easily. Nairenjiki's quirk is Twin Impact, and there isn't really much that can be improved on it. His quirk can only be used to impact things he has touched or hit with enough force so that his quirk can be activated. So basic punches or kicks from Nairenjiki on a person. Him throwing an object, or what Izuku suggested. Jumping onto a point on the ground so it can be used as some type of trap. Making the enemy trip and fall over from the crater it creates. Kojiro's quirk is Simidine, which just the type of glue he spouts from his face. Quite similarly to Hantashiro, Kojiro's quirk classification is mutant as the changes to his body allows his quirk to work. Kojiro can alter how fast his glue can dry, and can even have it undry slightly, so he can pull items or people who are stuck in his glue out. It is incredibly sticky and hard to deal with. Izuku helped Kojiro figure out that he can fire his glue from one hole at a time, so he can make a rapid fire type effect, then just a quirk burst of glue. Kinoko's quirk is called Mushroom. It allows her to produce spores from her body with seemingly no downside. These spores grow on any surface and quickly become full-grown mushrooms. Kinoko's problem was that she had little control on where her mushrooms grow and can affect allies. Her main way of taking opponents down was suffocating them with her quirk. The only thing Izuku could suggest was create a path behind her as she walked to prevent sneak attacks, but be careful as it also could lead enemies to where you are. Yui's quirk was interesting. For every inanimate object she had touched with all 5 fingers on one hand, she could simultaneously increase or decrease their size by touching their fingertips together. Izuku had taken her quirk and dived deeper into it despite her obvious attitude towards him. He discovered that she can choose what the size was, but Yui had trouble doing so. So Izuku told her to work on that, but also remember her own clothing is her greatest ally. Izuku also notes that objects she has shrunk also decrease in weight, as well as vice versa. But the problem Izuku had with all of their quirks were none of them were seen as villainous. Don't get Izuku wrong. There is no such thing as a villainous quirk. But society deems quirks villainous for simple reasons. They are afraid of them. It annoys the hell out of Izuku because teleportation quirks aren't seen as villainous, but Akito's is because of his quirk's relation to darkness. Hitoshi's brainwashing quirk, which really should be mind control, is also seen as villainous because it can control others against their will despite how many more uses it would have as a hero. These 4 quirks would be so much more useful for devious or mischievous acts, yet no one cares. Nairenjiki can make someone feel considerable pain hours later. The force of it can turn some items to dust depending on how much force he put on them. Quirks that stick things together are good for both good and evil, but Kojiro's appearance certainly makes him seem a lot more villainous than, say, Minoru. Yui can crush someone with their own wallet, cut off their fingers being shrinking their rings, or throw a car at them. Kinoko is the worst of all. She can set up her fungi everywhere, which can make it hard for anyone to sneak up on her. She can constrict people and fungi and inhibit them from moving before suffocating them to death. Definitely heroic, isn't it? But people are afraid of quirks that involve basic phobias. People are afraid of darkness, not mushrooms. But Izuku relents. As much as it annoys them, it is something that isn't going to change for a long time, much to Izuku's disappointment. Izuku's next student was a strange one. Probably one of the more stranger ones of the entire school. Manga Fukudashi, a person with a speech bubble for a head. It's strange as he was born like that, but he has no parents or relatives that could have given him that kind of mutation. His quirk is also strange. It is an emitter quirk despite being a part of his appearance. What it does is allow him to yell out words from the literary device onomatopoeia. Words like snap, pop, bam, and boom. Izuku walked over to the boy as he watched him practice with his quirk. "Hello, Fukudashi," Izuku greets. Izuku watched as the sentient speech bubble turn over to him, a dace of a colon and a bracket forming as his face. "Ah, hello, sensei," the boy greets in a happy tone. That's all Izuku could say as he couldn't read Manga's expression. "What have you been up to?" Izuku hums. "Just practicing my quirk. Trying to increase the size of my speech bubbles," Manga states, and Izuku nods at that answer. "Can I borrow your quirk for a second?" Izuku asked. Manga looked at him shocked. I guess," he said unsurely. Izuku smiles and places his hand on Manga's shoulder. He enters Manga and grabs his quirk. It was strange, purely white and black, but the white seemed fixed and didn't flow while the black was ink-like. Izuku shot back out into reality and felt the new quirk inside of him. He noticed that Manga hadn't changed, which still confused Izuku on his appearance and quirk. Izuku also noticed that he had not physically changed, which made him frown. He knew this was a possibility, but it still doesn't feel right from how most quirks work. Nonetheless, Izuku turned around. He screamed out the word BAM, and suddenly a huge cloud with the word BAM. The word traveled about 15 meters before coming to a stop. Izuku then tried to produce another word, POP, but nothing would come out of his mouth. A cooldown his mind would supply. Izuku then turned around and gave the quirk back. "Alright, so you do have a cooldown between when you can produce words. From the video I watched from you, depending on the words you say can do different things. I would like you to gather every different words you know and use them and discover what they can do. Write them down and give them to me as soon as you can. Can you do that?" Izuku asks. Manga hums and gives Izuku a thumbs up. "Absolutely," he announces. Izuku was walking over to the next student. She was more of the livelier ones of Class 1B and definitely fierce. She was also similar to Mina in the way of her being fascinated with the relationships her classmates had with others. But instead of Mina's rom-com way of romance, Setsuna is more into the adult part of it. He walked to the girl who currently was missing her legs and arms as he watched parts of them attack the robots. Izuku likes Setsuna's quirk as it is very interesting. She is able to split her body apart and individually move those small pieces of her body at will. However, unlike the rest of her body, her feet seem bound to the ground as they seem to still abide by gravity. Also, Izuku notes that even parts that require internal organs can still function. Like her eyes, lungs, and mouth can still operate fine in pieces. "Tokage, how are you holding up?" Izuku asks. Setsuna turns to Izuku and grins with her pointed teeth. Izuku watches her small masses of body fly over to her and reform back into her. She then walks over to Izuku. What he doesn't expect is for her to grab his bicep and come incredibly close to his face. "I'm good, Cece, how have you been going?" she asks in a sultry voice. Izuku was shocked before he looked down at her coldly. Setsuna, looking at his unimpressed gaze, gulped. She smiled sheepishly and with an obvious expression of worry and fear. She let go of Izuku and took steps away. As soon as she was away, Izuku sighed and lowered his head, gripping the bridge of his nose. "I'm going to forget that happened. How many pieces can you split yourself into?" Izuku asks, trying to ignore what she had just tried to do. Setsuna was looking panicked and nervous as she looked away from Izuku. About 20 pieces, but some have to be bigger than others," Setsuna states. Izuku nods. "Can you stay dispersed for long periods of times?" Izuku asks. Setsuna nods. "Organs will have to return to me after 2.5 minutes. If they don't, they'll drop on the floor, and I'll have to regenerate them, which could take days," Setsuna states. Izuku nods at her. "So you have regeneration ability?" Izuku asked, and Setsuna replies with a nod. "I think you should focus on the speed of your quirk. Your quirk is excellent at spying and communicating to your teammates. Honestly, you could probably the best hero in covert operating missions if you can master your quirk, Izuku states. Setsuna just sheepishly nods her head, still embarrassed by what just happened. At least Himiko didn't see it. Izuku made his way to Juzo Hananuki, one of the recommendation students of Class 1B. Izuku definitely agrees with his place in this class. Juzo showed great ferocity and capabilities in the quirkless combat class Izuku had previously, but after looking at his quirk Izuku was impressed. Unfortunately, Juzo may have experienced discrimination because of the appearance. A note on his file states to not mention about the weird anomaly on his jaw. Not that Izuku is going to test it or has any interest in making Juzo upset, but he is curious if he would become hostile or upset. Hello, Hananuki, Izuku greets, walking up to the boy. The boy stands up, tapping the ground with his foot. Izuku notes that. Hi, sensei, do you need something from me? He asked. Izuku nodded his head. I wanted to see how your quirk worked, Izuku stated. Juzo nodded and tapped the ground with his foot. Izuku looked at him weirdly. The ground. One step in front of you is now softened, Juzo states. Izuku's eyes widened as he looked up at Juzo. Wait, so the things you have softened not detectable? Izuku asked, shocked. Yeah, until you touch it. Then the color of the things that are soft are obvious, Juzo says, demonstrating his point by dipping his foot into the ground. Immediately, Izuku sees what Juzo is talking about and notes that it kind of seems like quicksand. Juzo then raises his foot out and taps his foot on it again, making it become solid. I can do it through clothes as well, so I can sort of melt things off of me. I can make things solid again by touching it as well, Juzo states. Izuku nods, getting more information on this boy's quirk. What would happen if you harden something while someone is in it? Izuku asked. They would be violently shot out of it. Like a good few feet in the air, Juzo remarks. Izuku nods, putting a hand on his chin, thinking about something. Question. Does your hero suit allow you to swim in your objects? Izuku asked. Juzo nodded. That's the plan. Just unfortunate I couldn't do that this lesson, as that's probably the best thing I could do this lesson, Juzo says. Izuku nods in agreement, but he wanted to see them improve without the aid of equipment. That's all right. You'll be able to do that in the future. Right now, though, try walking through the robot or mannequin and practice launching yourself out of the ground. It may become useful in the future, Izuku said. Juzo nodded. Will do, sensei. Thank you, Juzo, thanks. Izuku was now onto the second recommendation student of Class 1B. Kozai Tsuburaba was the second recommendation student, which perplexes Izuku as what he's gathered from his attitude. Kozai is okay with being average. Izuku is also surprised he even made it into UA. The only reason he did was because of the student who rejected the acceptance letter. Look, I know that canonically Setsuna is the second recommendation student of Class 1B, but I literally couldn't find a way for Kozai's quirk be used to take down robots in a reliable way. His quirk breaks from a punch, so there is no way his quirk should have been strong enough in the entrance exam. So he is now the second recommendation student, just in case something about the entrance exam comes up. Kozai seemed to be punching his air walls he created, seeing how strong they were. Hey Tsuburaba, are you using your quirk as a punching bag? Izuku asks. Kozai laughs, but looks away. Yeah, I'm trying to strengthen my quirk, he states. Izuku sighs and shakes his head. How is he a recommendation student? Izuku walked up to his wall of solid air and lazy raised his fist in the air before punching it. With little effort, the wall shattered. Your quirk doesn't change durability if you punch it. It stays the exact same when first created. Your quirk's durability will change with experience, not with repetitive use in a small time. You need to get creative, Izuku states. Oh, okay, Kozai says unsurely. Copy what I do, Izuku says. Izuku moves his hand over his mouth and cups it in a specific way. Kozai copies what he does, focusing on Izuku's hands. Now activate your quirk and blow, Izuku commands. Kozai does what he says and blows out a wall. Except this time of it creating a flat wall, he created a dome with the round part pointing in his direction. Kozai was shocked. Well, how did you know I could do that? Kozai asked, turning towards Izuku. I didn't, but quirks normally have similar quirks. I looked at quirks that are close to yours and saw that they could be shaped, Izuku stated. Wow, a thanks sensei, Kozai says. Izuku nods, turns and smiles at the boy. All right, trying to figure out a way to make your constructs bigger and more complete. Then try and use your quirk to make stepping stones in the air. Also see if your saliva can do something with your quirk, Izuku suggests. Cozy Eye smiles widely at Izuku. Ah, cool. Thanks, Sensei, Cozy Eye smiles. Izuku dodged a flying horn that whizzed past his head. The horn was traveling very fast and might have killed him. Izuku looks to Pony Tsunatori, who was the person responsible for the flying horn. Izuku looks over to her, who is looking at Izuku, looking terrified. Izuku sighed and shook his head as he continued walking over to her. He grabbed his phone, just in case he needed to use it as Pony is still learning Japanese. Tsunatori, Izuku says as he approaches her. The girl stiffened and straightened up. Why yes? She asked, extremely scared. Izuku made it up to her and looked at the robot next to him and saw the several horns embedded into the robot. Izuku looked back over to her and saw that her horn was already growing back. You need to be more careful. Remember, quirks are weapons that can easily be used to kill, Izuku said. Tsunatori didn't look any less distressed. Yes, sorry. Didn't know some words, she then stated in broken Japanese. Izuku sighed as lowered his head. He was good at English and could do it quite well, but if he were to use his knowledge and actually try to speak it, he'd be horrible at it. So Izuku brought up his phone and started typing into it. He then grabbed his book and ripped out a page before grabbing a pen. He wrote what he had down on the page before handing it to her. Here, Izuku said in English. Tsunatori nodded and grabbed the page and started reading it in her head. Get better at both precision and accuracy. Also try increasing the size of your horns while they were in the air, as from your entrance video, I saw this happen. You also seem to have a strong telekinetic ability of your quirk, but hard to use because of the speed of your quirk. Try to master that first, as that ability will be a formidable asset. Also, do you have a tutor for Japanese? That would increase your understanding, and even if you do or don't, befriend someone at this school who is fluent in English, ask them for help. Preferably a student, as they will have more free time on their time. It read. Pony looked up to Izuku before bowing, being careful not to poke Izuku with her incredibly large horns. She thanked him before standing up, still looking uneasy. The next student Izuku went to was Odd. Not him as a person, although he acted a lot like Ijiro from class 1, of which Izuku already thought was an oddball, but his name was Odd. Tetsu, who names their child that? Someone cruel, that's for sure. Izuku walked over to the boy as he had his entire body made out of metal. He was punching the robot, which barely looked like a robot anymore, just a heap of metal. Izuku groaned and shook his head. Tetsu, I said not to destroy the materials provided. Izuku shouted out to the boy. Quickly the teen looked up and suddenly looked incredibly sheepish, rubbing the back of his head. Sorry, Hope-sensei. I, forgot completely, Tetsu admitted. Izuku sighed and shook his head. That is some paperwork I will have to deal with later, he said in a disappointed tone. No matter. Have you made much progress with your quirk? Izuku asked. Tetsu gave a hearty laugh, but shook his head sheepishly. No, I haven't really done anything, Tetsu admitted before purposefully kicking a part of the destroyed robot behind him to hide it, like it would do anything. Izuku shook his head in mild disappointment. Can you turn parts of your body into steel, or is it restricted to your entire body? Izuku asked. Nah, it's my entire body, then determined by my iron intake for how long I can keep my quirk active, Tetsu told. Izuku nodded at that. Can I look at your quirk? He asked. Tetsu looked at him oddly. Like, take it for a second to learn more about it, Izuku said. Oh sure, Tetsu said, smiling with a toothy smile at Izuku. Izuku smiled and took Tetsu's outstretched hand and dived into for his quirk. The quirk was heavy and the light was both arc and light gray. Izuku got both a metallic and earthy feeling from it, quite similar to the first quirk Izuku ever stole. Izuku retrieved the quirk before activating it. He felt his skin, hair, and eyes all turn into steel. But Izuku noticed something odd. Everything inside of Izuku's body was not altered. His blood and organs remained the same. While Izuku's teeth and nails became steel, the rest of the bones in Izuku's body remained as iron. But the only thing that does is tell Izuku that Tetsu is lighter than what he would be if he was entirely steel. Izuku moves himself around and found that he could do that with almost no issue. Izuku could see that the steel was somewhat malleable, but only when Izuku was the reason for it moving. But Izuku then decided to go about the only theory he had on Tetsu's quirk. There just simply wasn't anything interesting about his quirk. So Izuku raised his hand and tried focusing his steel onto his hand. Izuku watched with bright eyes as Izuku's left hand suddenly became both thicker and heavier. I thought so, Izuku said with a smile. Thought what? Tetsu asked. Izuku outstretched his hand and let him look at the difference with it. You can increase the steel in the certain place on your body. You can probably improve this in the future as well, Izuku states. Tetsu looks at Izuku and smiles widely. He walks to Izuku and slaps him on the back while cackling. That's awesome, bro. I mean, sensei. Thanks, Tetsu says happily. Izuku laughs along and shakes his head. He gives Tetsu his quirk back, but has the thought. You are just like Ijiro, aren't you? Izuku walked over to Yosetsu a ways, one of the last of his students that Izuku has to check on. He has a quirk called Weld that allows the boy to merge to things at the atomic level. They can be broken apart, but it is extremely difficult. Izuku looked at Yosetsu as he welded all of the objects to the ground. How are you going, Yosetsu? Izuku asked. The boy turned to him and smiled. Oh, just seeing how much work I can do. I'm also seeing if I can find a limit with my quirk as I haven't found if I have one yet, Yosetsu says. Izuku smiles at Yosetsu as he states his reasoning. That's great, but can I suggest something? Izuku says. Yosetsu doesn't hesitate to nod. How about looking to try and find materials that could be best suited for your quirk, as your quirk would work best at incapacitating an enemy with little issue, Izuku suggests. Yosetsu nods his head and smiles. Actually, I have already thought of something like that. I have metal logs in my hero costume to help in me trapping enemies I touch, he says, which makes Izuku smile wider. Excellent. You obviously know what you're doing. But I also suggest you get other things and materials. Because if one person can counter you or that material, you become extremely less effective, Izuku states. Yosetsu frowns and nods before smiling earnestly at Izuku. Thank you, sensei. I will take that into consideration, Yosetsu thanks. Izuku heads to one of the stronger people of Class 1B, at least in just basic visibility. Just like Class 1A, Class 1B also has students that just seem stronger than the rest. Jiroda Shishida has the quirk called Beast. It is of the transformation variety of quirks, which are the rarest types of quirks that would be encountered, but oddly, they seem to be stronger most quirks. His quirk turns Jiroda in what can be best described as a Bigfoot-like creature. The boy is already extremely hairy, but that hair spreads even further when transformed. When he is beast form, the boy is 6 feet 10 inches and his fist becomes the same size as his head. The teeth on his lower jaw grow and more muscles appear on his body. The senses on his body are also heightened. Specifically, his scent and hearing are dramatically enhanced, but his cognitive function dramatically decreases, becoming animal-like in nature. Izuku is unsure whether that can be increased or not, but would like to find out. Izuku walks over to his student, who is currently in beast form. He seems to be writing in the ground with the mangled materials sprawled far around him. They weren't destroyed, but were certainly broken. Shishida, are you there? Can you understand me? He asked the student. Jiroda turned to Izuku, but he seemed indifferent and confused. Izuku then watched the large boy suddenly poof with minor smoke. Jiroda, no longer in beast form, appeared. He stood up and adjusted his glasses. Sorry, sensei. I have trouble understanding what others say when using my quirk, the boy says. Izuku nods and smiles. No, I completely understand. You were trying to increase your cognitive abilities while transformed, right? Izuku asked. Yeah, it's kind of fuzzy while in that form, and even when I become normal again, the boy admits. Izuku nods. What were you trying to achieve to increase your mental abilities? Izuku asked. Jiroda seemed confused himself. He turned around and pointed at something in the ground. That, I guess, he calls. Izuku walks over to whatever he was looking at. It was a drawing in the ground that Izuku saw him doing. It looked like a cat, but it could have easily been a dog. It looked like a toddler's drawing with its horrible anatomy and use of circles for almost every part. Izuku said. I don't know how to increase your intelligence while in beast form, but hopefully we can help your perception of others in it. For the rest of today, I suggest seeing how much you could with transforming back into your normal form, then back into your beast form quickly, Izuku tells. Jiroda nods. Yes, sir, I will try, Jiroda says. Izuku went to Ibara Shiozaki next, the second student with an extremely powerful raw power quirk. Like some of her other classmates, she also seemed oddly emotionless. or extremely mature and stoic. An odd out of this class with very few emotive students. They were certainly a lot less expressive and loud compared to Class 1A and Izuku's old classes he was in. She had an elemental mutant quirk, which are extremely rare unless it is nature-based. Otherwise, it is more common than if it were the other two. Nature mutant quirks are one of the few varieties of quirks that are more common in one of the other two classifications than emitter. Izuku walked over to the girl which he knows is super religious. For her being a hero, Izuku knows she is one of the stereotyped Christians who despised quirks. But even the ones who are about 99% of Christians who don't hate quirks, they still tended to have strong opinions on them. Like villainous quirks being created by Satan. Izuku walked towards Ibra hopeful, as their previous encounter wasn't any more than distrust from what he could tell from the girl. Ibra was currently using her quirk offensively like a whip, but she held herself in the air in a prayer position on top of her vines, all wrapped in a tower. Shiozaki, Izuku called out. Ibra opened her eyes slightly to look down at Izuku. Is something the matter? She asked in a tone that Izuku didn't like. She made no move to stop what she was doing, of whipping the materials given with her quirk that were suspended in the air in vines. Why are you so high in the air? Izuku asked. To test my abilities and control with my quirk, the girl states, demonstrating in a way by moving herself through the air with incredible control. So much so that Izuku was sure that Ibra might be being passive-aggressive. Izuku looked at the robot and mannequin that Ibra was hounding with her vines. The power of you whipping the materials can increase by wrapping your vines around each other, Izuku stated. He watched the girl scoff. Obviously, but you said not to destroy the materials provided, the girl said in an annoyed tone. Izuku frowned at the hospitality the girl was showing him. Then don't form them into being thick enough to destroy the materials, Izuku stated with sass back at the girl, which got him a judgmental glare. It hardly matters. My quirk is best used at constriction, the girl responds, changing the whipping vines into wrapping around the robot, and Izuku could hear the metal starting to dent. Yeah, I know. Also, is there a limit to far you can extend your vines? Izuku asked. He had this question set out for her, but it is going to be his only suggestion towards her. Because she obviously is very good and smart about the use of her quirk already, and Izuku really didn't like her attitude towards him. Yes, 2 kilometers exactly. It has been that distance since I was born, so I can't make them grown any more than that, the girl states. Izuku sighs at her, but nods nonetheless. At her behavior, Izuku can tell she won't take whatever he has to say seriously and just talk back to him. So Izuku turned around and started walking to his next student. Your vines are very good at traveling through the ground. Perhaps you could use that skill to move yourself through the ground, Izuku called out before leaving the annoying religious girl. Izuku walked up to his next student, which also so happened to be the one he was dreading the most just based on his attitude. Nito Monoma. The boy was not only arrogant, but dismissive and very loud and obnoxious. He seems to have an inferiority complex or something close to what Katsumi seems to have. It was hard to tell, the boy was just weird. It's such a shame because his quirk is something that Izuku would really like to analyze. Not only because it was a copy quirk. Quirks based around quirks in general are rare like All for One, but almost all of them seem to have a common restriction. Other than All for One, none of them work on mutant quirks. The closest to this is Eraserhead's Quirk Erasure. But his quirk is misleading. The thought of what his quirk does is erase the quirk, but what it actually does is block activation. That is the reason why it doesn't work on mutant quirks, is because it stops activation, but their activation can't be turned off. His quirk still works on secondary activation, though like Hanta firing his tape or Tinya activating his car like Speed. But Nito's quirk is different. It is the first quirk that Izuku has seen or heard of other than his own that works on mutant quirks. Not only that, but mutations that are affected by the quirk. Like he would grow horns for a quirk despite it being a transformation-type quirk. It is unfortunate that such an idiotic butthole possess it. Hello Monoma, Izuku called out. Nito turned around, and Izuku could see that he was testing Itsuka's quirk. Nito smiled with his grin that reminds Izuku at the back of his mind of the Bakugo twins. Hey Teach, I got a question, the boy says with a snark. Izuku raised an eyebrow at him. Yes, what is it? He asked. Nito walked up to Izuku and reached his hand up to Izuku's head. I want to test something, he said. Izuku immediately understood what he was doing. Nito can copy another's quirk from touching their hair. The boy was currently trying to copy Izuku's quirk. Now Izuku wasn't worried of Nito taking his quirk or stealing his own quirk, as Izuku's quirk is immune to it. He found this out by diving into his own quirk and learning more about it. Izuku's problem that if Nito took another's quirk and his time limit went up while he was still in possession of the quirk, that they would permanently lose their quirk. Izuku quickly reached up and gripped Nito's hand harshly, making the boy wince. Izuku's horns grew and Izuku forced some of his iron bones to cover parts of his face. He glared at the now frightened boy who was shaking. "Do not activate your quirk on me. I have not given you authorization to use your quirk on me to obtain mine. You have not shown any semblance of being worthy of holding my quirk. If you do something like this again, I will have you immediately expelled." "Understood," Izuku said furiously. Nito gulped and nodded in fear at his teacher. Izuku, upon seeing his expression, sighed and retracted his quirks. He took a step back from Nito and calmed himself down. "I apologize, Monoma, but you have to understand. My quirk is a powerful and dangerous quirk that not everyone is allowed to obtain or know I have. Please, do not do this again unless I specifically instruct you to," Izuku says, calming himself to speak to Nito. "Why yes, I'm sorry, sensei," he says shakily. Izuku sighs as he walks over to Nito. He gets next to him and looks in the same direction that he is facing. "All right, Monoma, I have a special mission for you," Izuku says, gaining Nito's attention. "Your quirk requires the quirks of others. Most of the time, the quirks you use will be teammates, as they will be willing to give you their quirk and you'll have opportunity to use it prior to a fight. So your job is to learn about your classmates' quirks and find out all they could do. Can you do that?" Izuku asks Nito. The boy turns to him and smiles, but it was obviously shaky and nervous. "Of course, it will be a piece of cake," he announces proudly, but still obviously scared. Well, Izuku can't say he didn't deserve it. Izuku walked over to Himiko and the two boys who went off to spar. Tagaru, Kamakiri, and Hiryu Rin. Tagaru had the quirk called Razor Sharp, which allowed him to grow sharp blades from any part of his body, but most commonly his forearms and feet. His blades are sharp enough to cut through steel pipes with no issue. Hiryu's quirk is called Scales. It allows him to grow scales throughout his entire body. The scales are sharp enough to damage iron and can be launched off of his body, proving to be a formidable form of both offense and defense. But right now, both of them were on the ground, tired with small cuts on their bodies, as Himiko was smirking near them. She spotted to Izuku and walked over to them. Izuku sighed. "What did you do?" he asked. She looked away and shrugged innocently. "Nothing, they wanted a fight, and I gave it to them," she said. Izuku shook his head and looked past to the two students. "No more sparring. The lesson is almost over," Izuku said before grabbing Himiko's hand and walking away to the front. Soon the entire class left and Izuku and Himiko traveled home. The day was over and it was time for a rest. Izuku grabbed the keys from his pocket. He opened the door and took a step inside, but as soon as he did so, Himiko hugged him from behind and grabbed him tight. "Come on, Izuku, let's do something fun," Himiko said in a sultry tone. Izuku gulped before gasping. The day was over and Katsuki was leaving UA. He got a notification on his phone. He grabbed it and picked it up to see who it was from before frowning. It was a bunch of slurs and insults, calling him a backstabber and a liar who got away with everything. The message was from his father, but he knew his father would never even think to do something like that. So the person responsible for this is his sister, Katsumi. She, along with Shoto, have been constantly sending him these kinds of messages. He blocked their number, as well as Zayato's, knowing he'd get the same from her eventually. Whether she was the one texting or it was her brother. The only of his old friends he hadn't blocked or deleted was Izumi. Why? Because she was asking questions about Izuku. Not like where he was and why Katsuki wouldn't bring him home with insults after that. She asked if he was okay, if he was happy and had friends. She had done this after Katsuki left the Yagi house after the reveal of him knowing where Izuku was. Katsuki, although didn't want anything to do with her anymore, didn't delete her number as he knew she was trying. It had taken him longer than him, but it was better late than never. He hadn't exactly forgiven himself for it either. So out of fairness and for her own sanity, he has given responses to her questions, but nothing much. They seem to satisfy her. He doesn't know what All Might and Green Tornado have been doing. They are both still heroes, but Green Tornado has fallen to the number 18 spot and is still declining. All Might has firmly remained as the number 1 hero. Katsuki has a feeling that won't remain soon after his successor is chosen. All Might doesn't have a choice on who One for All goes to, and Katsuki suspect that Izuku may be the person to choose who it goes to. "Hey Bakugo," a cheery voice yelled. Katsuki immediately recognized the voice and turned around. "Round cheeks," he called. Ochako was running to him, her hands gripping her bag straps. Katsuki has given nicknames to most of his classmates, minus the few he hasn't interacted with yet. He had given the name Round Cheeks to Ochako because of her extremely round face with rosy cheeks. Katsuki had always given everyone nicknames, even to his old friends. Icy Hot, Steam Train, Blonde Head, and his personal favorite for his sister, Shithead. He didn't even realize that nicknaming everyone was so a part of his core character. He constantly nicknames others, whether he means to or not. Katsuki has been able to turn down his nicknames from swears or insults, but he still isn't sure if he is doing well enough. Sometimes the words just spit out, and he can't stop himself before he says it. Even with his year plus of therapy, that part of him has not changed. "Wow, you got out fast," she huffed, bending down and placing her hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. "Yeah, I am a fast walker," Katsuki mutters before looking down. "You need something?" he asks, trying not to put any bite on it. Ochako lifts her head and smiles up at Katsuki. "Today's lesson was awesome. Hope-sensei is a lot kinder than what he appears to be. I was really worried until I actually got to talk to him. Guess the media really hype him up as a bad guy." Ochako smiles. Katsuki grunts and looks away. "Yeah, he's portrayed as evil because of his quirk. Damn, people are just scared at the semblance of someone having an unnatural quirk." Katsuki huffs, making Ochako laugh. "You know, you have a really strange way of conveying your emotion, Bakugo. Very explosive, I must say," Ochako comments. Katsuki freezes at her words. He had always been a bad-tempered kid. People would comment about until they knew of his quirk and no longer question it. Like it was, yeah, it makes sense. Someone with that quirk would be a butthole. It was the exact same reason for why no one helped Izuku. Everyone knew he was quirkless, and everyone knew he and his friends had got quirks. It still makes Katsuki feel disgusting. Ochako frowned at the look of pain on Katsuki's face. She didn't mean to upset Katsuki. It was just meant to be a funny jab at his personality and quirk, but it must be something on a deeper level to him. "Sorry, Bakugo, I didn't mean anything bad from it, I promise," Ochako said. Katsuki turned to her, looking into her big and bright eyes. They reminded him of Izuku when he was younger. Ochako in general reminded him of Izuku. Katsuki sighs and looks back to Ochako. "It's whatever. You didn't answer my question from before. Why did you want to talk to me?" Katsuki asked. That was also a question Katsuki was asking himself. He already had a full group of friends despite not even trying. It wasn't even like they wanted to be his lackeys. They just pulled him into the group and asked him questions a couple of times. Unlike before, they weren't treating him like a god or better than everyone else, but as an equal. Katsuki still doesn't understand this. He is aware that he is a more tolerant person to be around, but there are still far better options, and he still wasn't exactly friendly. Even to Ochako right now, Katsuki was struggling to find the words to be kind to her despite her easily being extremely friendly back. Hope-sensei asked me to work on my flying capabilities. Other than technically Tokoyami, you're the only one in who can fly. So could you help me out sometime?" she asks. Katsuki looks at her shocked. He assessed the situation for possible responses and found that he would most likely come off as rude if he didn't just accept. "Yes, sure, just give me your number," Katsuki says, raising his phone up and unlocking it. Ochako smiles brightly and whips out her phone. They trade numbers and send a text to each other. "Cool. Now where are you going to get home?" Ochako asked. Katsuki cringed slightly, but hoped that Ochako didn't notice. Unfortunately, he did. His relationship with his mom hasn't gotten better. She still won't even look at him, which Katsuki understands and respects. He also doesn't want to be in the house while Katsumi is there, as she'll probably just yell and attack him again. He'll just use the money his father gave him to rent out a hotel, as he has nowhere else to stay. He would ask Izuku, but Himiko wouldn't exactly be happy with that idea. Train station red. Katsuki simply answers. He sees worry on her face, but she brightens up with a smile. "Great, that's where I have to go to. Do you want to walk together?" she asked. Katsuki grunted and turned around. Why not, he stated. Ochako quickly caught up to him, and they walked to the station. Dabi walked in Yusufatsu, a more crime-ridden part of town. There are less news outlets here, meaning cameras would take longer to get there. Meaning limelight heroes usually stay away from this area, as there is no point in coming here if no one was going to see them doing heroic deeds. Meaning that this place houses a lot of crime, usually without interruption. Dabi has only recently been allowed to travel without Eraserhead. He is officially a pro-hero but has to remain an underground one. Not that he is complaining. He would have become an underground hero anyway if he had the choice. He would work a lot better as one already seeing, as he already has multiple connections in the underground. Because of this, Dabi has quickly rise in the ranks of the underground heroes because of his success. It was at first thought that this was a ploy to make himself seem greater, but thanks to Eraserhead, he was able to confirm that this information he already knew and was now acting up on it. He does understand the suspicion, though. No underground hero has even risen to top 50 in about a month, as it usually takes years for some of the best underground heroes to establish themselves. Several trafficking rings and operations were shut down simply because they knew Dabi. He was fierce and often unforgiving with a deadly quirk that has little counters to stop it. Dabi is already well known at Naomesa's police station. Because of how many people he has brought in, he knows that several people are concerned about his appearance, but just like Eraserhead, he doesn't care what they think of him. Dabi is walking about the near-empty streets with hands in his pockets. He is lazily looking around for anyone breaking the law. He'd prefer not to see anyone. Dabi has had the tendency to just let people go if the crime isn't severe, as he couldn't be FD bringing them in. But then he hears a scream. Shut up. No one will come to save you, and you know it. The husky voice says back. Dabi growls, but walks to the voice. He looks down the alleyway and sees two figures. A middle-aged woman with green skin and white hair was pinned against the wall from a man. He had muscles, but nothing amazing other than his arms. They were huge and muscular, probably a quirk like death arms. The hell is going on here? Dabi asks with a snarl as he steps into the alleyway, making himself known. Both of them turn to look at him, the man's large hand still covering the woman's mouth. Get lost, loser. Unless you want to fist up your butt, the man yelled, turning around and shaking his fist at Dabi. Dabi let out a TCH and rolled his eyes before smirking at the man. Dabi continued walking towards him. Dude, that was such a weak threat. Do you still live with your mummy and can't risk saying a few swears? Dabi taunts with a wide grin. This sets the man off like Dabi had wanted as he pushed the woman to the ground and started walking over to Dabi. UMF. The man yelled, but he didn't get far. Dabi instantly ignited a hot flame of blue fire in his hand and threw the ball at the man. The man barely got his enlarged arms in front of him in time, but it did little to save him. The man was knocked back and yelled in pain. His back hit the wall of the alleyway. With the man no longer blocking the woman's path, she instantly shot up and ran out of the alleyway. Dabi moved to the side, allowing her to run. Dabi then continued to walk over to the man whose arms are burned badly. The man looked up at Dabi, scared. He put his arms forward as the man started to shake. All right, I surrender, man. I'll do what you want, the man said, becoming very scared. Dabi stopped and hummed at the man. At least he understood that this was a losing battle for him. A lot of other thugs would continue to fight him even when they had zero chances of winning, thinking sheer numbers would be able to beat Dabi. Dabi started to think whether it was worth it to bring him in or not. He wasn't exactly sure what the guy was doing, but it was most likely assault. He couldn't just let a raps go. It would be a pain, but Dabi would do it. Just get up and come with me without issue. It would be in your best interest, Dabi said, stretching his arms. The man nodded and stood up, but then something strange happened. A purple mist started forming around the man. The man could only briefly scream as he fell into the mist. Dabi instantly sprinted to the mist, but as soon as he got there, it had become a tiny wisp before disappearing. I've never seen you before, a deep monotone voice said from behind Dabi. He whipped around and saw the figure a man. He wore a suit with a white undershirt with pastel green sleeves. It reminded Dabi of a bartender's outfit, but that wasn't the main part of Dabi's eyes had caught. The man was a smoky mist. It was a deep purple and seemed to wisp away from them. It was the same mist that just made the man disappear. Instantly sensing the danger from the man, Dabi raised his left hand and fired a brief beam of blue fire. But a black wall of mist appeared in front of the man, and it seemed that his fire traveled into the mist. The next thing Dabi knew was that something hot hit him on the back. Dabi grunted as he stumbled forward, but luckily for him, Izuku's quirk that he was gifted made him extremely resistant to his own flames damaging him. Dabi growled as he looked up at the man. The purple misty wall quickly shrank and disappeared. Dabi quickly realized that he had a portal quirk, a more advanced and rarer teleportation-style quirk. Dabi mentally slapped himself for being reckless with his attack, but quickly regained his ground and stared at the misty man. That's a strong quirk. Sensei would like that, the man muttered to himself. Dabi's eyes widened. Sensei would like his quirk? Dabi knows of gangs going around and recruiting people with fearsome quirks. A lot of people have come to him with the mind of recruiting him. But how the man said it, and his attitude seemed off. Not only that, but the fact that he just took the other guy. He knows what that man's quirk was, and it wasn't nearly strong enough to gather attention of potential recruiters. This person also had an extremely powerful quirk, something that only a strong force would have. So Dabi is confused on why they would want that man. But another thought came to his mind. Who was Sensei? Why would he be interested in strong quirks? The only solution Dabi's mind would think of is the quirk All for One. But that couldn't be right, could it? Dabi growled and lit his hands on fire to threaten his foe. Who is this Sensei, and where is that man? Dabi asked sternly. The misty figure just shook his head. Sensei is none of your concern, but you will meet him. Your quirk would be something that he would like, the mist man told. Dabi muttered a swear under his breath. That only makes him think that the man this villain is talking about is the original All for One. Dabi was about to speak again, but he felt himself falling. Dabi looked down and saw that the misty portal was formed from underneath his feet. Dabi was falling through. Dabi was almost completely in the blackness of the portal until he ignited his quirk along his feet and hands. The force of his fire pushed Dabi up like a rocket as blue flames grow beneath him. The portal was closing, but Dabi zoomed back out with an explosive save. Dabi glares down at the misty man whose yellow eyes stared at him wide with shock. Dabi moved his hands and feet and rocketed himself towards the villain. Yet again, a portal blocked Dabi from the man, but this time he was ready. Dabi spun and blasted himself to the side. He avoided the portal and saw the villain again. He threw fireball at the villain and hit him. The man grunted as he was launched back, but he seemingly formed a portal and disappeared, reappearing further back at the alleyway. Dabi landed on the ground. Thinking fast, Dabi pulled his hands forward and ignited it. He swung his arm back in a spinning motion and swung his arm near the ground. Dabi threw a wall of fire towards the portal villain. Another portal was formed in front of the man with another behind him. Dabi watched as his wall of fire continued through. Dabi brought his hands up again and was about to attack again, but watched as he disappeared. Dabi waited. He looked around for the man to appear again, but he never did. Soon Dabi heard sirens. Both police and fire engines. Dabi muttered curses as he moved around his wall of fire out of the alleyway. The woman he had saved must have called the police and reported on the hot fire in the alleyway. By the time Dabi gets out of the alleyway, the police and fire trucks are already there. The police get out and raise their guns at him, unaware that he is a hero. The firemen wait as the police yell at him. Freeze, put your hands up. They yell. Dabi groans, but then he spots someone getting out of the car. It was Naomasa. Dabi starts walking over to him, ignoring the yell of the other policeman. The detective opened their arms exasperatedly at the sight of what was behind Dabi. What the hell, Dabi? The detective asks, but Dabi ignores it. He walks up to the man and roughly grabs his shoulder. He pulls him away from the car he was in, and Dabi turns around, his back facing the other policeman. He leaned into Naomasa and whispered 7 words that would start panic in the man. I think All for One is alive. Izuku was excited for today, so was Himiko. His students should also be ready as well. Because today, they'll be doing battle training. Something that they've all been waiting to do. Izuku was eager to see how they'd all act in a simulation of an event. Izuku also would like to see what their hero costumes are. He wants to know what they had thought of what they want to look like as a hero and anything that would help them in hero work. Obviously, Izuku is aware that some will be better than others, but it would be a great opportunity to help them. But before school starts, Izuku has something to discuss with a certain someone. Something that he is very excited about discussing. Izuku walks into the staff room and spots the person he wants to speak to. Despite the glare the man sends his way, Izuku hops on over to him, grabbing a chair and sitting next to the man. "What do you want?" Eraserhead groans, sitting up in his chair with 2 large coffees on his desk. Izuku smiles up at him. "Do you remember Shinso from the entrance exam?" Izuku asks. Eraserhead grumbles and narrows his eyes at Izuku further. "Yes, I remember him," Eraserhead grumbles. Of course he remembers after midnight, and present Mike comparing Eraserhead to the boy. Izuku smiles at the grumpy hero. "Well, you also are aware that if someone from General Studies gets top 4 in the sports festival, they can be transferred into the heroics course," Izuku said, knowing that Eraserhead knew. The man's glare hardened as he grumbled something about problem child. "But you also know how unlikely that is, being only you and Midnight have ever graduated from General to heroics," Izuku states. "I'm not allowed to intern him from the festival," Eraserhead muttered, but Izuku shook his head. "I know, but UA teachers can intern students outside of that. Shinso's quirk is powerful enough to not deserve attention. I believe he has potential, but since I am the heroics teacher, it may be seen as favoritism for me wanting to teach a certain student," Izuku smiling innocently at Eraserhead. To which the man groans loudly as he realizes what Izuku is implying. "What makes you think I would willingly teach another problem child?" the man asks. Izuku thought, putting a finger to his chin with a smile. Then it seemed like an idea popped into his head. "Oh, I know, I'll tell Miss Joke," Izuku said excitedly. Eraserhead's eyes widened in shock. "You wouldn't," he said breathlessly. Izuku only smiled wider without showing any teeth. Eraserhead sighed and slumped down, knowing that he absolutely would. "I'll train him, only if he makes it into the tournament round." "Deal?" Eraserhead asked, and Izuku nodded his head. "Deal." Class 1 was excited for today. This would be the last day of the week, and now they have heroics. Hope Sensei had said that if he trusted them enough to not seriously harm another with their quirk, they could do more cool stuff. So when Hope and Carmilla entered the room, they were hopeful. Their hope turned into curiosity as they saw Carmilla holding a board. "Hello, class. Today we're going to be doing something more physical today," Izuku smiled, making the class gasp and smile. Suddenly suitcases shoot down from the ceiling, shocking the class. "In those briefcases are your hero costumes," Izuku said. At those words, the students shot up with excitement. Himiko smiled and held up the sign she was holding. "Because we are doing," she said excitedly. "Battle," Ochako started. "Training," Mina finished. Izuku smiled. "Correct. Come meet us at Battleground C with your costumes on," Izuku said before leaving the room. He heard roars of excitement from the room, making him laugh. Not because of their happiness, but because it would annoy Eraserhead. Izuku smiled widely at the students in front of him. They all looked awesome in their hero outfits, and if Izuku wasn't their teacher, he'd be geeking all over them. But he had a sense of responsibility to maintain. There were certainly things he would change about all of their costumes. Some more than others, Izuku thought, while keeping his eyes away from Yaoyorozu. Fyoki is wearing a white heat-proof suit with purple highlights around her gloves, boots, and ribs. She has black glasses on her with a dark purple cape. Izuku had a hat in his hands with pieces of paper in them as he waited for his entire class to arrive. Katsuki stood next to Ijiro and Denki with his hands in his pockets. The costume he was wearing was something that he had designed so he was 7, but has only improved it over the years. He and the rest of the class was in front of a cement building that had 8 floors. "Is that everyone?" Izuku asked. "No, Uraraka isn't here," Karo, Tyu said. "I'm here," an exasperated voice said. Katsuki turned around to see Ochako quickly run to the rest of the class. Katsuki looked at what she was wearing, and it was incredibly tight, pronouncing her feminine attributes. Katsuki suppressed his natural reaction of sneering and letting out a tch and remained quiet. Ochako stopped behind him, panting slightly. "Oh hey Bakugo, your costume looks amazing," she complimented. Katsuki felt his face heat up. He growled slightly and looked away from Ochako. "Thanks, you do too. But your costume seems a little tight," Katsuki said, with a little strain. Ochako sighed and nodded. "Yeah, it's a little tighter than what I would have liked. I'll hopefully get that fixed soon," she whispered. "All right, class. Now that we're all here, let me explain what we'll be doing today," Izuku said, catching everyone's attention. Everyone turned their heads around and gave Izuku their attention. We'll be doing an exercise of heroes versus a villain. You'll be randomly assigned a partner, and your task will be to find the bomb hidden by the villain in this building. You'll have 10 minutes to do it. You win by either subduing the villain or touching the bomb. Any questions? Izuku stated and looked around. Tenya's hand instantly shot up and Izuku called for him. Why are our partners random? That doesn't seem logical, Tenya stated, and Izuku shook his head. Actually, it is perfectly logical, Ida. Most of the time, you'll be fighting alongside the heroes who happen to be closest. You can't choose who you fight with, Izuku answered, and Tenya nodded at it. Izuku was glad that he accepted his answer. Any other questions? Izuku asked. He immediately regretted it, as the class burst out into questions. Izuku covered his ears as the words all mumbled together. He nudged Himiko for some help. She screamed, a high-pitched scream of a banshee. The class immediately shut up after that. Himiko went back to smiling. Izuku breathed and calmed himself down, putting his hands in front of him. Sorry, but I can't answer all of your questions if you yell them out all at once, Izuku said, taking another breath. He looked towards Momo. Yaoyorozu, we're in a building because it's a closer space which allows everyone to hide and regroup themselves. Also, it will be good for quirk control practice so you don't break the walls and cause property damage, Izuku said. Momo's eyes widened, obviously not expecting for her question to be answered, but she nodded and thanked Izuku. Izuku then turned to Ijiro. You will pick names out of this hat to determine teams. Izuku then turned to Tsuyu. There will be one lone person, but don't worry, they will be in a team. Izuku then turned to Yuga. Yes, that cape does look fabulous on you. Yuga smiled widely and bowed. Izuku then turned to Fumikichi. And for who the villain will be? Izuku smiled evilly, moving his eyes to look at Himiko. She giggled and took a step forward. Me, she shouted enthusiastically. The class erupted into whispers. Some were excited, some were scared. Izuku was excited to see what the class would do. Enough chit-chat. Everyone come up and pick a piece of paper. That piece of paper has a letter on it. Your teammate will have that same letter. The only person who won't have one is the person with the letter J. But don't worry, you will have a teammate, Izuku explained, holding the hat of paper around so everyone could grab one. Everyone did as he said, then went around to find their partner. Does you have a? Tenya asked as he ran up to some of his classmates. When they said no, he went to the next group. Katsuki watched Tenya run around and groaned. Oi, Robo, I'm your partner, Katsuki yelled out. Tenya turned to him before sprinting over to him with a frown. My name is Ida Bakugo. That is very disrespectful towards me. I don't think our classmates appreciate your name calling either, Tenya said. Katsuki scowled at the boy in front of him. Did he know what a joke is? It's all business with him, and he's really obnoxious and controlling. Katsuki scoffed and narrowed his eyes. If you weren't such a control freak with a stick up your butt, maybe you could find your long-lost sense of humor. Why do you think I call you Robo? Katsuki asked with a scowl. Tenya seemed to go red at that, and his face seemed to rise in anger. A few people around them laughed. Mizo wasn't good with people. He was friendly, but also scary. It's also the reason he wore his mask. His face was scary, and it did little to mask his overall hulking figure of a 14-year-old. Mizo looked at Fumikichi's number, the only person in the class who he could call a friend. After seeing that they did not have the same number, he went looking. Well, not like how everyone else would do it. Mizo formed eyes at the end of his tentacled arms and searched around. It took him a moment, but he spotted Fyoki with the letter B on it. Retracting his eyes, Mizo walked over to her. The girl looked up at the tall boy. She shrunk a little but smiled at the tall boy. You have B? She asked tentatively. Yes, I do, Mizo spoke, trying to see if the girl was awkward or afraid of him. Well, big guy, you better do your best to protect me, she said. Minoru was horrified, which was strange considering the circumstances. He was desperately trying not to drool at the sight of Momo's large womanly parts. Minoru was her partner, which meant he had an opportunity to feel them. But the sinister and Cheshire smile that Carmilla was giving him, and only him, chilled him down to the bone. He felt like if he tried anything, she'd kill him, which was most likely true. He could hold of at touching Momo. He didn't really need to feel the squishy godlike feeling he would have if he could get his hands on those. Minoru squeaked, feeling something sharp pinch his butt. It shocked him and burned, and Minoru immediately started rubbing it. Minoru looked back to Carmilla, who was no longer smiling, just glaring at the boy. Small drips of blood running down her finger. Minoru gulped. Mashareo was looking around for people with the letter D. None of his friends had it, and the other people he asked also didn't have it. Mashareo was slowly running out of options on who his partner was when people got into their groups. But then he suddenly felt a force slam into his back with arms wrapping around him. Ojiro, you have D, right? Toru asked. Yeah, Mashareo answered with a small blush. He was confused and unsure why she was holding him. It felt weird as she was leaning up to him on her tiptoes and pressing hard against his tail. He didn't want to move it because he'd probably smack her pretty hard by accident, and he didn't want to hurt her. Koji was shy and would very much prefer to remain in the background. But he was with some nice people. Fumikage and Rikido, for example. Tentatively, Koji reached his hand in and took one of the small pieces of paper. He held it up for him to see and unfolded it. The letter was E. Koji somewhat noticed a person looking over his shoulder, but he was too nervous to see who it was. He felt his hands shake. He wants to be holding his pet rabbit. She's gentle and soft and always knows how to calm his anxiety. Koji squeaks as a hand slaps him on the back. It wasn't hard to cause any pain, but it was still a shock. Hey Kota, we're teammates. Let's do our best, he heard Rikido say. Koji didn't have the ability to turn his head and look at Rikido. He was just glad that his partner was Rikido because he wasn't sure how other people would act after him being too scared to interact with them. Koji just settled with meekly nodding his head in response. Mina was disappointed that none of her friends had her letter F. She looked around and saw that everyone was talking with someone else. Mina pouted. It would be a pain to find her partner like this, so she would make her life easier. Hey, who is F? She yelled out. Me, Monsieur, Mina heard a voice say. Springing to the side, Mina looked to see Yuga smiling widely at her. Laughing, Mina winked at the blonde French. Let's dazzle Aoyama, she said happily. Denki looked around. His main group of friends already have found their partners, with him being the only one. Denki becomes jittery as he looks down at his piece of paper. He wasn't the one that didn't have a partner, did he? No, sensei had said that it was J, he had G. So why couldn't he find his partner? Denki had felt a tap on his shoulder. It was a finger, hard and smaller. Denki turned around and saw Kyoko walking over to him. She had one hand in her pocket with her other hand holding a piece of paper with the letter G on it. Denki sighed and smiled. Hey Jiru, looks like we're partners. The boy smiled happily. Kyoko didn't seem as thrilled, sighing and pocketing the piece of paper. I know that idiot. You know, it would have been easier for you by asking around, she said with a groan, crossing her arms over her chest and looking away from him. Denki's smiles falter at her reaction. Fumikage quickly looked that Mizo was not his partner, which made him sigh. But no matter, he didn't have an issue with anyone in the class. Well, maybe other than Minoru. Dark Shadow is different. He doesn't like Katsuki or Denki, but that's because they produce light. Fumikage sends Dark Shadow out to help him find his partner quicker, but his partner finds him first though. Karo, Tokoyami-kun, do you have H? Tsuyu asks. Indeed, Azui. Fumikage answers, bowing slightly. Tsuyu nods. Dark Shadow zooms back and quickly hops in front of Tsuyu. I like you. Dark Shadow purred before pressing its head against Tsuyu's stomach. Tsuyu was stunned in place. She looked up to Fumikage, who sighed while silently glared at his quirk. Apologies, but Dark Shadow often acts like a domesticated pet. In fact, he likes being pet on the head, Fumikage explains. Tsuyu nods her head before slowly lowering her hand on the shadow beast's head and stroke it, making the shadow hum. Ijiro turned to Hanta first, as he was the closest person to him, and would check if he got the letter I. To his pleasant surprise, the boy did. Ijiro laughed and slapped Hanta's back, holding his piece of paper up to Hanta. Would you look at that, bro? We're going to be a team, Ijiro announced, pumping his fists in the air. Hanta looked at Ijiro's paper and smirked, turning to the redhead. Yeah, dude. We've got this, Hanta responded. The boy pulled up his fist for a fist pump, which Ijiro happily delivered. Ochako happily grabbed her piece of paper. She quickly snuck a glance at Katsuki's paper to see that he had A. She knew it was unlikely that they were going to be on the same team, but she could hope. Ochako unfolded her piece of paper and froze. She had J. She was the one who didn't have a partner. But that wasn't fair. She can't possibly take Carmilla on by herself. Ochako took a breath and calmed herself down. Hope said that she would in fact have a partner. Who that might be, she didn't know. But she shouldn't freak out. This is just an exercise. Hey, round cheeks, are you alright? Katsuki asked, turning around to her. Ochako blinked at him, and she felt her cheeks grow hot. But nonetheless, she smiled up at the explosive boy. Certainly, I'm so pumped, Ochako said excitedly. Izuku waited until everyone had gathered their partners before he would continue. Izuku looked over to Himiko, who was eyeing the students mischievously. Izuku sighed and shook his head. He moved closer to Himiko and elbowed her in the side. She yelped at the contact before turning and pouting at Izuku. Go easy on them, Hime, Izuku whispered sternly. Himiko giggled before looking up at the sky thoughtfully, but with a huge grin. She tapped her chin with her finger. No promises, she giggled. Her mouth spread from ear to ear. Izuku groaned and shook his head, but he couldn't hide his smile from Himiko. He then turned to the rest of the class and clapped his hands, activating his pitch quirk to make it louder. The class all flinched before looking at Izuku and Himiko. All right, let's all get started. Carmilla, you may enter the building and hide the bomb. Make sure to grab some capture tape. As for you all, we're going alphabetically. I believe it is Ida and Bakugo who are A, if I heard correctly? Izuku asked, looking over to the two boys who nodded. Great, so you two will be first. Your goal is to either capture/defeat Carmilla or simply touch the bomb. You have 10 minutes to do this and have 5 minutes to create a plan with each other. The box with capture tape is next to the door, as well as an earpiece that allows me to hear and communicate with you. Good luck. As for everyone else, follow me to the observation room, Izuku said. The class nodded. Katsuki and Tenya stepped to the side, creating distance from the rest of the class. Himiko quickly leaned over to Izuku and placed a kiss on his cheek, which made some of the girls queue at the sight. Himiko then skipped away and went all the way into the building. Izuku walked past the class and gestured for them to follow. But before Izuku left, he turned back to the class. Oh, and by the way, if any team wins, you get no homework, Izuku smiled. This made the class cheer and yell. They walked for about a minute before the class reached a steel door. They watched as Izuku pulled out a card from his pocket. He lifted it up to the scanner next to the door. The red light at the top quickly turned green and the door slid open. The class was amazed at that, making Izuku smirk. He turned around with a smile. If you think that is cool, watch this, Izuku said with a grin. Izuku then walked further into the room, and again the class was astounded. What the class saw was a room that was a bit larger than their classroom, but instead of having desks and a board, it was a mostly empty room with a wall of electronics at the end. There were 10 televised screens with a panel having several buttons and parts to it, with the center having a microphone on a long silver stick. Izuku walked up to it and raised his right hand. The class couldn't see, but the lines on his hand were glowing a bright lime green. Izuku placed his hand next to the microphone on the panel, and the class was amazed. Lights of lime green grew on the panel from Izuku's hands, and it spread to every inch of connecting electronic on the room. All of a sudden, the screens all flickered on. The class could see hallways of room on the building. They watched as Izuku seemingly flipped through the cameras how he wanted until he found the room where Himiko was hiding the bomb. Izuku then made a camera look at Katsuki and Tenya as they stood outside of the building, grabbing some materials. The class was stunned. Wow, sensei, that was amazing, Momo said in amazement. Izuku smiled and looked behind him. Thank you, Izuku smiled. He then pulled his arm away and the green lights disappeared with it. Izuku then bent down to the microphone and gripped it with his left hand and pulled his face close to it. All right, Bakugo, Ida, you have 5 minutes to deliberate your strategy. You may enter the building when I saw go, Izuku spoke. Both Katsuki and Tenya were both shocked to hear Izuku's voice, as they had only just put the earpieces in before relaxing. They then turned to each other. Bakugo, I suggest the best course of action is for me to take the lead and scour the building for the bomb. My superior speed should allow me to escape and report to you for assistance, Tenya stated. The two did not realize that their voices could be heard by the entire class thanks to Izuku. Most of the class mentally agreed with Tenya. Nah, that's stupid, Katsuki responded. Some of the class looked shocked at that, with Tenya looking offended. Language, Bakugo, we are classmates, and why would that be stupid? It is clearly the intelligent way to go about this, Tenya stated angrily. Katsuki grumbled and shook his head. God, Carmilla has clearly shown capabilities of manifesting objects of her choice. She can create traps and can specialize them into defeating you, as she'd expect you to take the lead because of your speed. If that happens, I can't help you, and I know for a fact I won't be able to take her from there, Katsuki argued. The class was shocked at Katsuki's analogy. They don't know him too well, but because of his quirk they assumed him to be a guns a-blazing type guy. But he obviously is strategic and is observant of others. Katsuki took in a breath and raised his hands in front of this. So I suggest we go in together. I'll be in the front to try and lure her out with my explosion. Once we see her, you sprint in the opposite direction to try and find the bomb. Keep an eye out for traps, but otherwise I will try and hold her off. That good with you? Katsuki asked. Tenya had wide eyes in shock, but he kept his composure and nodded his head. Yeah, let's do that, Tenya responded. All right, heroes, your time starts now, Izuku said into the mic. Katsuki and Tenya turned to the door and walked inside. Katsuki had taken the lead when walking through the halls. After every corner, Katsuki leapt forward with his palm, ready to create an explosion. But Himiko was never there. Tenya was behind Katsuki, watching his six. The two continued on this path, making it onto the second floor. The class was currently trying to look for Himiko, but she wasn't on any of cameras. Izuku was also curious of how Himiko would attack the duo, and his question was about to be answered. Katsuki jumps to the new hallway with his palm glowing hot. But to his shock, Himiko was ready. She was crouched down and pushed herself up, gripping Katsuki's gauntlet upwards. Katsuki unleashed an explosion, but Himiko had already pushed his arm away. Katsuki growled as he flailed to get away from Himiko. Himiko jabbed Katsuki's jaw and kneed him in the stomach. Katsuki yelled and pushed his other palm forward and ignited another explosion. He fell down onto the floor, wincing at the pain. Himiko flew across the hallway but landed on her feet, but still slid on the ground. Tenya watched this happen before crouching down and getting ready to charge at Himiko. Go! Katsuki yelled. Tenya flinched at the noise and looked down at Katsuki as he pushed himself up, his palms popping with explosions. Tenya, remembering the plan, nodded before sprinting away. Himiko saw this and laughed. Oh, so you're a distraction? Well, looks like I'm already going to have to initiate phase 2. Himiko giggled. Katsuki was confused at what the hell she was talking about. He didn't expect her to suddenly sprint away. Instantly, Katsuki shot himself after her. However, he was struggling to keep up. Because of the walls, he had to limit himself, so Himiko kept toying with him, lobbing fire and glue as he launched himself towards her. Katsuki was getting tired as he continued to chase a losing battle. Once Katsuki turned another corner, he saw Carmilla standing next to a small red box. A glass lid was lifted up as Carmilla leant on the wall next to it. She giggled and waved to him before pressing the button. Sirens ring off in the building before she ran off again. Izuku smirked, knowing what she had done, but the rest of the class was still confused. What did she just do? Think he asked. Isn't that just the fire alarm? Ochako asked. Izuku nodded. Yes, it is, Izuku smiled. Just then, the sprinklers came on. Katsuki looked up to the sprinkling of water that was now showering him. He growled, hitting the ground. Damn it, he muttered. Katsuki then gave chase after Carmilla. He made it to a stairwell and looked up. He saw Carmilla climbing it, but going from railing to railing instead of using the steps. Katsuki growled as he felt his palms sizzle, the water already making his quirk weak. But nonetheless, an explosion still erupted from Katsuki and launched himself up, going from the second floor all the way to the 6th. Katsuki yelled as he grabbed the railings. He could feel his hands ache and starting to cramp, but he pushes on. He watches Himiko barge through the door on the 6th floor, making Katsuki swear under his breath. He climbed over the railing and ran after again. Carmilla looked over her shoulder to see Katsuki chasing her on foot instead of blasting over to her. She smirked, her plan already working. She then heard heavy footsteps. Carmilla turned the corner and saw Tenya try to run as fast as he can with his quirk, but the wet floor making him unable to. Tenya saw her, not being able to see Katsuki as he was around the corner. Tenya started to speed up, flames coming out of the exhaust pipes on his legs. He started sprinting towards Himiko. Himiko laughed and charged at Tenya. Tenya swung his leg up, going to kick Himiko, but started to slip on the water. Himiko just got down, her stomach on the floor. Tenya flew right above her. He went across the room and slammed into Katsuki. Oh, what are you doing? Katsuki yelled as he was pushed onto the floor by Tenya flying on top of him. The class with Izuku laughed at Katsuki's outburst. Tenya groaned and stood back up, glaring at the girl at the end of the hallway. She just stood there with a cheeky grin while laughing at the two. His engines revved up, smoking pouring into Katsuki's face. "Ah, what the hell, Robo? What are you doing?" Katsuki asked again, but his question was met with silence. Tenya then started sprinting towards Himiko. Katsuki saw this and pushed himself up. "Hey, what the? Get back here!" Katsuki shouted, but it fell on deaf ears. "I will take you down, villain," Tenya shouted, and the class laughed at his loud antics. Himiko did as well. The class then noticed blood dripping down her arm. "What happened to her arm?" Fyoki asked. Izuku just smiled. The class all gasped when they saw the blood start to change, slowly becoming a pole. Momo nodded. "So that's how her quirk works," she said. Himiko didn't move from her spot, waiting for Tenya to reach her. Tenya went for a punch, as last time he took out himself and Katsuki going for a kick. He punched forward at Himiko, who blocked it, putting the pole in front of her and directing Tenya to the side. She directed him into the all, and Tenya slammed into hard. The class winced at the harsh impact. Tenya stumbled back before falling onto the ground. Himiko hummed and tied him up in the capture tape. She then stood up and looked over to Katsuki, who could only look at what was happening, unable to do anything. "Ida is incapacitated," Izuku said into the microphone. Himiko grinned wickedly at Katsuki. "You're not as powerful without your explosions, are you?" She snarled with a grin. The class was confused. "Wait, why can't Bakugo use his explosions?" Ijiro asked. "You're going to have to figure it out. This is also a test for you all, to observe the strengths and weaknesses of what others' quirks can do. I'll give you all a hint. It has something to do with the sprinklers," Izuku said. Katsuki growled at Himiko. Not as powerful without his quirk. He knew he wouldn't have won a one-on-one against her anyway, but the prospect of being helpless stung. Katsuki brought up his hands that were closed into fist. He could still throw a good punch, could still kick and fight. He wasn't useless, worthless, or weak. Katsuki took in a breath. He'd always known that, but he was an idiot. Now he can see, without his ego glasses in front of his eyes. Katsuki punches his open hand and cracks his knuckle. "I'm not going down without a fight," Katsuki answers. Himiko laughs at this. She then charged at Katsuki, who stood his ground. He blocked a punch and a kick. Katsuki then got down and attempted to punch her in the gut. But Himiko caught his wrist. She swung Katsuki into a wall and smashed his head into the wall. A knife was then pressed to his neck that Himiko had grabbed from her pocket. And just like that, Katsuki had lost. "Bakugo has been defeated, villains win," Izuku announced over the intercom. Himiko laughed and jumped back. She pressed her hands to her cheek with a knife still in her hands. "Yay, I did it," Himiko said happily. Katsuki sighed. He felt disappointed. He's never really lost, but it is to be expected. He is not the best, and Katsuki has to learn. But Katsuki can't keep his eyes from going to Tenya and frowning. He told him not to do that. "Bakugo, can you help get Ida to the infirmary?" "He looks out cold," Izuku asked, speaking into the microphone. Katsuki groaned and nodded his head. "Yeah, whatever." Katsuki spoke and walked over to the unconscious boy. A medbot came around, and Katsuki helped Tenya into the stretcher it was carrying. Izuku smiled and looked back to the class. "All right, class, that was the first group. I hope you all took notes on what happened and apply them to your turn." "So who is Group B?" Izuku asked. Mizo and Fyoki raised their hands. "All right, you two walk down to the building and grab some of the capture tape and earpieces. You have 5 minutes to deliberate before entering," Izuku said. "Yes, sensei," Fyoki and Mizo said before turning around and leaving. Katsuki soon walked in after they had left, and the class congratulated his performance and asked why he couldn't use his quirk with the sprinklers on. Mizo and Fyoki entered the building. Fyoki seemed to be taking the lead in both planning and entering. This confused Izuku and others greatly, as Mizo clearly would be better at the front because of his scouting quirk. Fyoki was focusing her quirk to only hit in front of her, but the problem with it that it would take a while for her heat to traverse through walls. This is shown by a camera of Himiko, who is hiding behind a wall. Fyoki and Mizo were walking in her direction, and Himiko was feeling little of her quirk. She was able to keep quiet, so Mizo's ears couldn't hear her. The class watched as Himiko slit her hand and blood started to form in her hand. Himiko then jumped out of the hallway and threw her blood at Fyoki. Himiko turned her blood into fire, ramming into Fyoki. Mizo didn't have time to protect, but managed to catch her before she hit the floor. Fyoki's quirk instantly deactivated, and she held her arms and chest in pain from the fire. "Go find the bomb," Mizo whispered to her, placing her behind him. Himiko charged at Mizo with a wicked smile, but was ultimately unprepared at Mizo's speed. Even Izuku was surprised. Mizo charged towards Himiko, covering his body with one of his arms, and swiped at her. Mizo's sheer size and Himiko's overconfidence allowed her to be hit. Himiko was flung back, flying well over 10 meters, but she pushed herself off the wall and stayed standing. Fyoki retreated behind Mizo as he continued to run at Himiko. The two fought, mostly Himiko striking Mizo and dodging his attacks. The class was majorly impressed at Mizo constantly being hit and still charging forward with little issue. Even after Himiko created a pole and knuckle dusters, Mizo still charged on. It was only when he got hit in the face did it seem like the boy got hurt. Himiko, naturally finding a weak point, kept trying, but Mizo was good at keeping her away with his sheer size advantage and surprising agility. The class gasped as Mizo managed to get a hold of Himiko's leg. He gripped it and spun around before throwing her into a wall. Mizo then curled his right arms together to make it more dense. He pulled his arm back, as far away from his body as he could. Himiko, although hurt, was not nearly close to being out. Mizo punched forward and Himiko ducked down to avoid it. Collective surprise surrounded the rest of the class as they saw Mizo's arm go straight through the wall. Himiko saw her and took it. With her fist, she punched Mizo right in the temple. He coughed and dropped down to one knee but remained standing. Himiko moved out of under Mizo and lifted her pole above her head and slammed it down onto Mizo's. A shout cry of agony came from Mizo as the pole slammed into the back of his head. He dropped down, only remaining up because of his arm. Himiko wrapped capture tape around the boy as he groaned in pain. "Shoji has been captured," Izuku announced. Himiko smiled and bent down to the boy. "Sorry, Shoji," she whispered before standing up and running away. Himiko quickly ran to the 5th floor and raced all the way to the bomb. Fyoki had no made it there as she had gone to floor 6 and 7 trying to find the bomb. Once she had gone to the 5th floor, she already saw Himiko waiting for her. Himiko had made a small cloth over her arm and sprinted to Fyoki, who had her pole trailing behind her. Fyoki, with shaky and injured hands, pushed them forward and concentrated a beam of heat towards Himiko. There was a small stream of orange that Izuku and the rest of the class could barely make out. The beam hit Himiko's shoulder and it lit on fire. Himiko raised the cloth up to block the stream of heat. She patted down her shoulder while sprinting. Fyoki did the same thing again, but it wasn't slowing Himiko down at all. Fyoki screamed as she saw Himiko whip the pole around. She turned away, blocking her head, but the impact never came. "Nanami has been defeated, villains win," Izuku said in the microphone. Fyoki cracked her eyes open and looked over to Himiko. The pole was inches away from the side of her face, and Himiko purposefully stopped herself from smacking the poor girl with it. "Nanami, please go to the infirmary and grab some burn cream," Izuku said into the microphone. Himiko smiled at the girl, who still was slightly scared at the fact she was nearly hit in the face with a metal pole. She nodded her head and left. Mizo had already taken his arm out of the wall and unwrapped himself from the tape. He was rubbing the back of his head as he walked back into the observation room. The class congratulated his efforts and were amazed at his display of strength from him breaking the wall with a single punch. Izuku was more interested in how hard Mizo could punch, as he didn't have any problem with breaking through a cement wall. "Enough, everyone. Yaoyorozu and Mineta, you two are up next," Izuku said. The two nodded, but Minoru caught Izuku's warning stare as he left, almost making him pee his pants. Momo and Minoru entered the building with a plan. However, Izuku noted that Momo didn't seem confident. It was like she wasn't confident in her own abilities, which was really concerning for Izuku, as the girl was obviously super intelligent and very capable of analyses. Luckily, her teammate was Minoru, who was also really good at plan building when he wanted to be. Izuku will have to look into the later. However, the two didn't really get to do much with their plan, as Himiko had a plan of their own. Before they could even get off the 1st floor, Himiko was running at them screaming, spinning her pole around. Both were very startled at Himiko's strange display, allowing her to get very close to the two. Momo quickly threw her prepared bag that was filled with Minoru's ball at Himiko. But Himiko spun her pole in front of her, blocking all of the ball and sticking them onto it. Momo, scared that Himiko was not affected by this at all, acted quickly. She formed her own metal pole. Himiko raised her up and swung it down at Momo, who blocked it. But now, it was stuck to Himiko's. Himiko raised her pole up, bringing Momo's with it, shocking the girl. Himiko took this opportunity and swept Momo off of her feet. The girl landed on the ground. Himiko quickly pushed forward. She pushed a part of her pole onto Momo's stomach with one of Mineta's ball and put another part of her pole onto the ground that also had one of Mineta's poles, sticking Momo to the ground. Himiko didn't have time to celebrate her victory, however. She reached into her pocket and quickly pulled up her knife. She swung it up at a flying purple ball, stabbing it. She looked over at Minoru, who gulped. He took a step back. Himiko then grinned dangerously at the midget. She jumped over Momo and sprinted towards Minoru, who screamed in fear. He threw a couple more ball at the oncoming Himiko, but she swiped at them with a knife that still had one of Minoru's ball on them. Himiko now had a knife that had 3 purple spheres attached to it. Minoru tried running away, throwing his ball down on the ground in a hopeful attempt at sticking Himiko, but she easily avoided all of them, running up the wall at some points. Once she finally reached Minoru, she smacked him with it. Because of the strange properties of Minoru being repelled from his own quirk, the small boy flew into the air and crashed into the wall. Izuku suppressed his chuckle, unlike the rest of the class. He looked over to Momo on the camera and saw that she was making no attempt to make something to try and free herself. Izuku sighed and shook his head in disappointment. He reached for the mic. Both heroes have been defeated, villains win, Izuku announced. Himiko hauled Minoru onto her shoulder and walked back to Momo. She had Minoru free her before sending them back to the observation room. They were given a good try, as they really didn't do well. Team D, you are up next, Izuku yelled, interrupting the class's chatter. Toru and Mashireo entered. Neither of them had much hope of winning, as neither had an offensive quirk to combat Himiko's superior fighting skills. So they made a plan for Mashireo to be a distraction while Toru snuck around. However, the plan didn't work as Himiko made a trap. The two had split up, Toru going up the steps first. As soon as she did, a flower and water were dumped on her head. With her quirk negated, Himiko racing to her location and Mashireo nowhere, close to help. Toru knew she was screwed. Himiko saw the invisible girl covered in flour and ran over to her. Toru attempted to put up a fight, but didn't achieve anything as Himiko wrapped her hands in capture tape. Izuku had to commend her attempt at trying and not conceding defeat, despite knowing she'd lose. Hagakure has been captured, Mashireo sighed as he started to run around the building. He knew he would lose in a fight, so his only chance of winning was to find the bomb. However, Himiko would not let him run. Being extremely fast gave him no choice but to fight. Mashireo is the only one in the class with experience in fighting Himiko, but he hadn't won yet. But he attempted and did really well, lasting 4 minutes until Himiko kicked his face and his head hit the wall. Hero team defeated, villains win, Izuku announced. Mashireo was praised when he returned from his fight, but he knew it was nothing. Himiko didn't use her quirk against him. Toru sighed, upset with herself as she didn't do anything. Okay, Team E is next, Izuku said to the class. Rikido swallowed some sugar he held in his container. His muscles increased into incredible proportions and took the lead. Koji slowly walked behind him. Koji ordered a few birds and to look around the building and kept 2 lizards with him. The 2 birds found Himiko and started screeching her location. Himiko growled as the birds avoided a rock she threw at them before sprinting away. She saw the 2 boys and charged at them. Rikido got in front of Koji. Koji threw his 2 lizards over Rikido and had them attack Himiko. He then turned around and ran. Himiko hissed as one of the lizards but her ankle, but she quickly shook it off. Rikido ran at her, although slowly because his quirk doesn't increase his lower body strength, only upper body. The bite from the lizard had made Himiko start to bleed. She grinned as she kicked her leg up, turning the blood on her ankle to sand. Rikido cried out as sand got in his eyes. He swung at Himiko, but was way off. Himiko rolled through his legs before sprinting past him, going after Koji. Koji squeaked when he realized he was after him. Himiko quickly caught up to him and gripped his wrist. She twisted him around and was about to wrap the tape around him. But Koji kicked her stomach, catching her off guard. He used his free hand to smack her across the face, which had also surprised her. The class cheered as Koji fought back and succeeded. Himiko growled and lunged at the quiet boy who panicked at the animal and noises she was making. She tackled him to the ground and subdued him. Kota has been captured, Izuku announced. Rikido huffed as he ran to his friend, but was too late. Himiko smiled before running over and attacking him, while sort of, mostly removing the rest of the sugar off of his body, then proceeded to avoid him for the next 5 minutes. Once those 5 minutes were up, Rikido had passed out from a sugar crash as of a result from his quirk. Hero team has been defeated, villains win, Izuku announced. Rikido was lifted up by medbots and taken to the infirmary to wake up. Koji returned to the observation room where everyone congratulated him, which made the boy extremely uncomfortable. Fyoki had came into the room shortly after. Other than Mizo, no team really was ever winning against Carmilla, which had brought the spirit of some of the class down. They didn't think they could win. All right, who is Team F? You guys are next, Izuku said. Mina and Yuga skipped into the building. They didn't have a plan other than charge and find the bomb. They made it to the 3rd floor before finally spotting Himiko. Yuga charged up a laser and fired it at Himiko, who barely dodged. She proceeded to scrape by lasers as Mina slid over to her. Himiko jumped back, avoiding a blob of acid that was hurled at her. Mina then clasped her hands together and sprayed out acid like a hose at Himiko. She screamed in pain as the acid burned her skin and slowly ate away at it. The class roared in excitement as the duo gave Himiko a run for her money. But Izuku stopped them. They were confused until Izuku said, Himiko was bleeding. Electricity sparked out from the new burn wounds that Mina was giving her. The electricity traveled up the hose of acid and struck Mina. The electricity shocked her, stunning Mina. Himiko quickly ran to her quickly and punched her in the face, knocking Mina out. As Himiko did that, a laser hit her in the face. Himiko yelled as she was flung back. She hit the ground hard, but stood back up. Yuga was shaking slightly as the pain he was receiving from his quirk was growing. He turned around and ran away to try and look for the bomb, but Himiko gave chase. Yuga attempted to fire some more lasers at her to slow her down, which worked as some of them hit her, but because of Yuga overusing his quirk, they weren't that strong. Yuga was on the 4th floor, that's where he saw the bomb. But he didn't get a chance to try and touch it as Himiko pulled him back and wrapped Yuga up in capture tape. The hero team has been defeated, villains win. Izuku shouts into the microphone. The class all groan. That was the closest they had been to defeating Himiko, who had not taken a break by the way, and any injuries she had sustained carried over, so it made some of the class feel worse. Yuga came back to the observation room, while Mina was brought to the infirmary. Yuga was congratulated, which he gladly accepted with a bow. But he immediately regretted it, as the French boy vomited on the floor. Izuku sent him to the infirmary, then quickly went to work cleaning it up. Group G go down while I quickly clean this up, Izuku stated. Denki and Kyoko walked into the room, and the class already thought they wouldn't do well. Their dynamic wasn't there at all as Denki tried talking to Kyoka only for her to growl at him in annoyance and flat out ignored him. There was a point where Kyoka stopped Denki and stuck one of her earphone jacks into the wall. She listened to what she could hear. Izuku watched as Himiko was directly above them, but was being incredibly quiet. She had mastered the art of silence, so he knows it is difficult to know Himiko is coming. But to Izuku's surprise, she pointed up, which greatly impressed him. Denki nodded and took the lead. He carefully looked around as they walked up the floors, making it to the 2nd one. Himiko, however, was hot on their trail. But Kyoka could hear her. She ordered Denki with a whisper to hurry up as she was catching up to them. Denki nodded and sped up. Himiko noticed them running now and threw out the stealth tactic and started sprinting to find them. Denki and Kyoka tried running, but only were barely able to make it to 3rd floor until Himiko had caught up. Denki summoned electricity around him and got in between him and Kyoka. Kyoka continued to run and search for the bomb. But Himiko was ready to fight Denki. She had an insulating blanket already made and covered the front of her body with it. She pushed Denki and tripped him, intending to run past him, but he stopped her. Denki managed to stay on his feet by quickly moving his feet. He stomped on Himiko's feet and pushed her. Denki then started punching her with surprising speed. Izuku smiled at that. Denki was boosting his muscles to punch faster. Himiko was having a hard time blocking as the blanket was mostly covering her. But she managed to throw it off of her and covered Denki with it. She tackled him to the ground. Denki managed to reach around the large insulating blanket and gripped Himiko's leg. He then let loose his quirk. Himiko screamed in pain as the electricity ran through her body. But eventually it stopped. Denki went dumb, saying way from overuse. But miraculously, Himiko stayed standing. She was panting hard and her body was aching, but Kyoko was still running about. The class was shocked to see Himiko get back up and run again, but noticed her considerable limp in the leg that Denki grabbed. The class also saw electricity reappear on her every now and again, making Himiko seize up momentarily. Himiko raced to the bomb on the 6th floor and started protecting it, running around the floor to try and find Kyoko. But Kyoko was good at hiding. She was able to detect Himiko incredibly well thanks to her quirk and Himiko struggling to stay standing, so she wasn't all that worried about keeping quiet. Kyoko noticed a place where Himiko kept going back to and concluded that was the bomb. So when Himiko was going into the opposite direction, Kyoko made a dash for it. Himiko heard her and immediately ran back, but Kyoko already had something planned. She plugged her earphone jacks into her boot and released a sonic screech at her. The loud sonic's wave pushed Himiko back and Kyoko ran into the room. Himiko yelled as she fought through the pain, biting her lip. She stood up and charged into the room. Kyoko sprinted, breathing heavily. Class 1 cheered for her in the observation room as she closed the distance to the bomb. Kyoko extended her earphone jacks towards the bomb. Himiko flicked a small spark of electricity at Kyoko's feet, making the purple-haired girl trip. She slammed onto the ground. Himiko jumped on her, pining Kyoko to the ground. But Himiko failed to notice Kyoko's earphone jacks reaching for the bomb. Hero team has secured the bomb. Heroes win. Izuku shouts into the microphone. The class cheer in excitement from their classmate's success. Himiko blinks. She follows along the elongated skin of Kyoko and see them touching the bomb. Himiko slowly gets off of her and helps Kyoko to her feet. Wow, great job, Jiro. Himiko congratulates with a strained smile. Kyoko nods. Thank you, she accepts. Wow, Kyoko was amazing. She beat Carmilla, Ochako said, praising her classmate. Izuku nodded his head. Indeed she did. But remember, Jiro could only have done that thanks to Kaminari's efforts in electrocuting her, Izuku reminded. The class all nodded their head, remembering how Himiko struggled to move after Denki's electrocution. Izuku looked back on the screen and saw Himiko on the ground, holding her knees. He frowned, switching the camera off of her. Okay, class, I have to help Carmilla. Don't touch anything while I'm gone, Izuku threatened as he left the room. Izuku turned into an electric bolt to go faster. He reached Himiko and went over to her, seeing that she was extremely sad. Izuku got down next to her and placed a caring hand on her back. Himi, are you okay? Izuku asked caringly. He heard Himiko sniffle and look up to him with tear-brimmed eyes. I lost, she said sadly. Izuku smiled at her, caressing her cheek. And that's okay. You didn't have to win every fight. I'm very proud and amazed of how well you did and all of the plans you made for the students. Izuku smiled widely. Himiko looked at him with wide eyes. You're not upset with me? She asked, and Izuku looked at her in disbelief. Why would I be upset with you? Izuku asked, smiling caringly at her. Himiko smiled and pulled Izuku in for a hug. Izuku laughed and embraced her back. He then pulled away and kissed her on the lips, winking at her, making Himiko giggle. Hey, let me quickly heal you, Izuku said. Himiko nodded. Izuku grabbed Himiko's hand and took away her quirks. After a bit of practice and trial and error, Izuku found out that he can have others use quirks that are not similar to theirs if they don't have their original help, but Izuku still needs to make sure Himiko doesn't accidentally harm herself. Izuku had Himiko use fat inflammation, healing all of her wounds almost instantly. Izuku then gave Himiko back her quirks before standing up. 3 more fights left. Keep them on their toes, Izuku called out to Himiko as he left. Will do. Himiko yelled back, jumping back onto her feet. Izuku then bolted back to the observation room with his quirk. He opened the door. Rikido was back from his nap, as well as Yuga. Kyoko was being congratulated for her performance, and Izuku could see a smile present on her face. Hey, quiet down. Team H is next. Izuku yelled out to the class. Fumikage and Tsuyu were next. Fumikage stayed mostly in the shadows in order to increase the size of Dark Shadow. Tsuyu was able to camouflage herself and traverse around. She almost went unnoticed, but Himiko managed to spot her. The two fought Himiko, both saving each other on multiple occasions and trying to subdue Himiko. The closest attempt they had was when Tsuyu had wrapped Himiko around in her tongue. Dark Shadow was extremely close to capturing Himiko as he flew to her with capture tape, but Himiko cut her thumb with a ring on her finger and zapped Tsuyu, making the frog girl release her. However, Himiko wasn't having much success either in capturing the students. Both of them had amazing teamwork and constantly saved each other from a range. Not only that, but thanks to Dark Shadows and Tsuyu's amazing agility, Himiko was struggling to keep up with them. Even with the ability to create fire, the weakness to both Fumikage and Tsuyu wasn't helping enough to defeat them because of Himiko's limited supply of blood. Unfortunately, both them and the class didn't get to see the match end. Time's up. Villains win. Izuku announces. Himiko sighs in relief and Dark Shadow shrieks in disappointment. Himiko congratulated the two of them as she wasn't able to subdue either of them. Even Kyoka, who had won technically, was subdued. The two walked back to class and were congratulated by their peers. Well done, you two. By far the best teamwork of the day, Izuku praised. Both of them bowed and thanked him. Izuku then turned to Ijiro and Hanta. He raised his hand and pointed at them with two fingers. You two are up next, Izuku told. Ijiro and Hanta raced in. When Hanta spotted Himiko, he spewed out loads of tape from his arm. He made a huge web of tape as him and Ijiro ran in the opposite direction of her. But Himiko cut through it with a knife, and the tape on the floor she burned. She quickly caught up to the duo. Hanta attempted to hit her with tape, but Himiko avoided it by jumping around the hallway, landing on the walls, and jumping from the ceiling. Ijiro attempted to hit her, but Himiko flipped over him. She kicked Hanta in the face and wrapped his hands in. Capture tape as he fell to the ground. Shiro has been captured, Izuku said in the microphone. Ijiro was able to stand against Himiko for a good 2 minutes thanks to his quirk, superior size and strength, but he was eventually caught after Himiko formed some of her blood into glue, sticking him to the ground. Heroes have been captured, villains win. Himiko then freed Ijiro. The two boys walked back to the observation room. Katsuki congratulated them, which they took great pride in, hugging the blonde much to his dismay. Izuku smiled at the display, shaking his head. Everyone settled down, Izuku called to the class. He waved his arms down in a motion to lower the noise. The class became quiet and looked over to Izuku. There is still one more fight left. Uraraka? Izuku said, looking over to the girl. She sheepishly smiled and nodded her head. But then she looked around the room. But I don't have a partner, Ochako said. Izuku nodded and smiled. Yes, you don't. Now everyone other than Jiro, who volunteers? Izuku asked. The class all flinched. As much as they fun had in this exercise, a second go wasn't ideal. Himiko was viscous and almost all of them were hurt, and the ones who weren't got taken down instantly. Ochako lowered her head, upset that no one would be her partner. I'll do it, a raspy voice said. Ochako's head shot up and the rest of the class looked over to the volunteer. Katsuki raised his hand up for a second go. Izuku smiled and clapped his hands. Excellent. Bakugo and Uraraka, you two can head down. Remember the free homework, Bakugo, that also applies to you, Izuku called out. Katsuki grumbled and raised his thumb in the air. He and Ochako walked down to the building. Hey, thanks Bakugo for volunteering. I'm really glad you did, Ochako mentioned, not making eye contact with Katsuki. Katsuki looked over to her with a raised eyebrow. Why is that? He asked. Well, people work better together with people they like, so I'm really happy you volunteered, Ochako admitted, turning to Katsuki with a bright smile. Katsuki felt himself stop working at her bright smile. He felt his cheeks turn red, a feeling he didn't like. Katsuki grumbled and turned his head away, grabbing his face. Yeah, no problem. I had no problem doing it. You'd be a better partner than Robo anyway, Katsuki responded, hiding his blush. The two walked to the door. They grabbed an earpiece and some capture tape. They both turned to the building, looking all the way up. Ochako then turned to Katsuki. So Bakugo, you're good at making plans. Do you have one? Ochako asked. Katsuki hummed as he looked over the building. Well, as we both can fly, it would be better for Carmilla to put the bomb on the first floor so we can't come from two ways. Mainly me blowing a hole in the roof. But other than that, I have no clue. She toyed with me the first time, running away from me until she pressed the button that turned on the sprinklers. She'd probably just bloody turn them on instantly, nullifying my quirk. And since you'd need to get close to her to activate your quirk, There's no shot as her martial arts abilities greatly passes ours. No offense, by the way. Katsuki apologized after he realized he insulted her capabilities of her quirk. But Ochako still innocently smiled up at him. None taken. But I may have a solution to the sprinklers, Ochako stated. Katsuki looked over to her, interested. Shoot round cheeks. I'm all ears, Katsuki said. Well, if we can grab a sheet, I can tie it to you and make it float to create a makeshift umbrella, Ochako suggested. Katsuki looked at her before cracking a wicked grin. Round cheeks, you're a genius, Katsuki said. Ochako then turned beet red. Izuku smiled as he heard that. First compliment he's heard Katsuki give, ever. He was also impressed with the two's strategy to try and negate Katsuki's weakness. The two entered the building. Just like Katsuki said, the sprinklers turned on after 5 seconds, but the two were already running into an empty room. Katsuki ripped an open curtain off of its railing and handed it to Ochako. She quickly started tying it onto the back of Katsuki's collar. She floated it up and it covered Katsuki, preventing him from getting wet. The two smiled at each other before they ran out again in search for the bomb. Katsuki rounded a corner and lit of 2 explosions. Himiko was down low, prepared to pounce up at Katsuki again, but she didn't expect the 2 explosions at once. Himiko yelled as she was hurled back, but she managed to get herself back onto her feet. She looked up and saw the cloth floating above Katsuki and growled. She created 2 knives and threw them at the cloth to try and rip it. But Katsuki blew them away with his explosions. Himiko was having trouble. She couldn't create projectiles to throw because Ochako was sticking by Katsuki's side, and whenever she could separate the two, she had grabbed 2 of her knives, giving Himiko a challenge. Ochako had also thrown some of her own objects back at Himiko, which have hurt a lot. Katsuki and Ochako ran away from Himiko as she let out some electricity from her. But as they ran, Ochako saw the bomb. Bakugo, the bomb! Ochako shouted. Katsuki turned his head and saw it as well, but with his brief focus no longer on Himiko, she took full advantage on it. Himiko created a large spear and threw at the small connecting part of the cloth at Katsuki. Oh no! Katsuki swore as the cloth above him was quickly taken out. The spear carried it all to a wall and pinned it to the wall. Katsuki looked back and saw the electricity looking brighter. Katsuki's eyes widened as blood was now dripping onto the water. He quickly turned around and activated his explosions on the ground. He blew the water away and created a smoke screen which protected him and Ochako. Katsuki then gripped Ochako's wrist and started to run. He moved them both behind a wall and leaned up against it. Katsuki looked up to the ceiling of spraying water and swore, his quirk already basically gone. He then turned to Ochako. Okay, new plan. We've got 1 shot. Let's go, Katsuki said with little explanation. Izuku and the rest of the class were intrigued at what Katsuki's plan was. Ochako included. Himiko continued to rush where she had seen Katsuki and Ochako run to. She ran towards, but saw Katsuki pop out from behind it. He raised his hand, but it wasn't glowing. His second hand on the pin of his gauntlet. Katsuki grinned and pulled the trigger, creating the largest explosion he had created that day, but it still wasn't a lot. Himiko managed to avoid it, jumping to the side. She reached into the smoke and grabbed Katsuki's hair. She pulled him out and slammed him on the ground. She put her knee on his shoulder blade and made sure he couldn't move. Lost again, Himiko smiled. Not yet, she heard Katsuki say. Himiko looked to the side and see Ochako jumping out of the smoke. She had one of Katsuki's gauntlets on her hand, her second hand on the pin. Himiko had no defense, in both evading and blocking as Ochako pulled the pin. Himiko was blasted off of Katsuki and slammed into a wall. Katsuki got up and rammed himself into her. Run round cheeks. Katsuki yelled. Ochako nodded and started sprinting away. She took off the gauntlet and let it drop to the ground as she ran away. Katsuki attempted to keep Himiko pinned, but she wasn't having any of it. Himiko kneed Katsuki in the crouch, causing him to cry out. Himiko headbutt Katsuki's chin before moving him off of her. She stood up and gave chase to Ochako. No, Katsuki shouted as he pushed himself up and chased after Himiko. He watched Ochako run into the room with the bomb with Himiko right behind her. Katsuki turned to corner ready to help, but saw Himiko standing near the doorway. He looked for Ochako and saw her floating in the air towards the bomb. He watched her as she then grabbed it and hugged the bomb tight. I got it, Ochako yelled. Heroes have secured the bomb. Hero team wins. Izuku announced. Class 1 screamed in joy at a second-class victory. Katsuki smirked as Ochako slid down while Himiko was bouncing up and down on her feet, clapping her hands. Wow, you guys were so good. Great job, you two, Himiko congratulated. Ochako smiled widely. Thanks, Carmilla-sensei, Ochako thanked. Katsuki grabbed his stuff and walked with Ochako out of the building and went to the observation room. Great job, round face. That was awesome, Katsuki smiled. He looked over to Ochako and saw her pout and look over at him. Katsuki's expression instantly was wiped off and replaced with worry. Had he done something wrong? You know it's not fair that you call me by a nickname and I don't. Do you have a nickname that I could call you? Ochako asked. Katsuki looked at her oddly and with relief. He then started to think about the question for a bit, before smirking at Ochako. Yeah, Kachin, Katsuki answered. Izuku smiled over his class as they congratulated Katsuki and Ochako. Denki, Tinya and Mina have come back from the infirmary and were updated on everything they missed. This was one of Izuku's best weeks of his life. Too bad good weeks to arrive without the bad. So, this was the end of part 7 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.